The Quest Begins by Forrest Claiborne Weir. A Touchstone for Youth Searching. Copyright 1936 by Gospel Trumpet Company. Printed in the United States. To Esther. Chapter 1. Awakening. A scientist, it is reported, now hopes to extend the lifespan to 150 years. But even if he should succeed in so laudable an effort, he would only sharpen more definitely the problem of making life worth living that long. In all normal people there springs up, at least occasionally, the intense desire to live the richest and fullest life possible. In each the wish for happiness and success is matched by the dread of dying ordinary. Young people sense only vaguely this dread, for their eyes are fastened upon the future. They run forward to meet and to embrace its revelations, which they are certain hold extraordinary experiences for them. Middle-aged people, on the other hand, often wake up to a realization that the bright and anticipations of youth remain unfulfilled. Mr. Harvey O'Higgins, in his book, The American Mind, relates the story of Julia Ward Howe. During girlhood, she had been pampered and admired. Life for her had no serious frustrations. But one day, after she had grown up, she confronted her own reflection in the mirror with an accusing query. Is that all? Many today, like her, suddenly face the realization that they are not what they seem to be. Some few seem to achieve and to be everything that the heart could wish. Some few sink to the unspeakable depths, but in between on the misty flats, the rest drift to and fro, neither entirely defeated nor wholly successful and happy. Many of them are already beyond wishing for a better life. They would be gratified to gain that positive eternity of pain instead of this insufferable inane. Some of them could no doubt yet achieve serenity of spirit and some degree of success by simply facing the fact that their unfavorable circumstances or lack of capacity to fulfill youthful dreams, and by doing the best with what remains to them. But this little book is written for those who have not come to middle-aged disillusionment yet, who are beyond the stage where life is merely taken for granted. Escape from an inane middle age and an old age of despair is perhaps more of a matter of what happens in youth than most of us realize. I propose the positive achievement of abundant life as a superior alternative to the ideal of escape. The secret lies within us. We should like often to escape this truth, to charge our disappointments and moral failures to outward circumstances. If we had a different home life, different employment, or different social environment, we should be different persons, we argue. And perhaps we should, but that would only prove that we are creatures of our environment, whether it be good or evil. The indisputable fact is, however, that two persons may not respond in the same manner to any one set of circumstances. Truly moral persons are not subject to the caprices of circumstances. They have character in themselves. In fact, in anyone's life, the outward environment is not as important as his attitude. Some people can be trusted with anything anywhere. Others can be trusted only among those who know them. Jesus recognized this truth when he told the story of two men who built the houses. On both houses came the same wind and the same flood. One stood, the other fell. The difference was not in the exterior circumstances, the elements of the storm, but in the houses. One was built upon sand, while the others were supported by stone. Consider again how two men went up to the temple to pray. In the presence of the same altar, and surrounded by the same sacred memories, the two acted in an entirely different manner. One of them squared his shoulders, and in nonchalant impudence proclaimed his own virtues. The other fell upon his face and confessed his sins. Something within the two men prompted a different response. The same observation can be made by anyone. Let two men visit the low moral levels of a city. One an immoral man, and the other a social worker. The one will embrace and will enjoy what he finds there, but the other will return more secure in his own purity. The reason for their different behavior consists in the quality of the inner life of the two men, what they really are. What we are at any particular moment assumes the whole of our past experience, even much of the history of the race. But what we become depends upon the values of what we put upon our native powers. Chapter 2. Exploration. This conviction that what we are determines what we do in any given situation lays upon us the obligation to explore not only our own potentialities, but the essential moral and spiritual powers of the race. An explorer, unlike a prophet, is not without honor even in his own country. Bird of Little America, Wilkins under Arctic ice, or Freud in human consciousness. Each has excited the imagination of others and received their acclaim. If new countries needing pioneer exploration seem few, turn to the vast continent within, which has hardly been touched. Look there not in moody introspection, but in earnest sincerity for clues to the attainment of life's greatest promises. One finds much there for study. The miracle of me, to use Bernard Clausen's phrase, offers mystery and adventure. The most intricate and complex of mechanical inventions cannot compare with the dexterity of the human hand. The most involved electrical switchboard is simple in comparison with the human mind. And what of man's moral nature? Their analogy defies us. Arising in the depth of the human spirit, it cuts channels of its own. No limit can be set upon it. Courage, love, faith, what are their limits? They set themselves to the tasks already defined, but they dream audaciously of things yet inarticulate. The full depth, height, and strength of the moral life of Jesus have not been yet measured. Failure to achieve at least a modicum of our moral and spiritual potentialities means for us tragedy. Who of us has not felt the poignancy of Tennyson's cry? Oh, for a man to arise in me, that the man I am cease to be. In Nathaniel Hawthorne's notebooks, discovered after his death, appears this entry, quote, "Suggestion for a story in which the principal character never appears," unquote. That is not only an interesting suggestion, but a reminder of the many lives in which that story had already been written, lives in which the real person never seemed to emerge. In his poem, The Voiceless, Oliver Wendell Holmes memorializes the many of these, quote, "who die with their music still in them," unquote. Where could be found a more pitiful picture of unrealized moral grandeur than that presented in these lines from Lord Byron? Quote, "This should have been a noble creature, with all the energy which should have been made, a godly frame of glorious elements, had they been wisely mingled. As it is an awful chaos, light and darkness, and mind and dust, and passions and pure thoughts, mixed and contending without end or order, all dormant and destructive," unquote. But failure here has consequences of far greater significance than our own personal fortune, consequences for society. Our age calls for character, intelligence, and courage in persons to a degree not demanded by other times. Other ages had their challenges. At times, leaders had emerged endowed with the capacity demanded. But never have we had a surplus of persons of dependable character. The strain is even greater at this moment. Gouverneur Morris represented the United States and France as an unofficial observer during the faithful days preceding the Revolution of 1789. He wrote to President Washington concerning Louis XVI, quote, "He is an amiable and upright man, and doubtless would have made a fine minister in peacetime. But unfortunately his ancestors have bequeathed him a revolution," unquote. Ordinary patience, honesty, generosity, courage, and insight doubtless would suffice for a time of ordinary strain, but ours is no ordinary time. The needs of our day exceed those even of the times of Washington, Lincoln, and Wilson. Our generation, unfortunately, has been bequeathed not only one but several revolutions. One of these appears in the realm of thought. The mystery and the bigness of the physical universe grows on us with our increasing knowledge of it. And perhaps even more perplexing than this is the increasing feeling that human society itself runs according to a set of laws not yet known. Consider these lucid lines from Professor Hawking of Harvard University. "There is everything in human experience to give us, as we look at the facts of nature and of history, a sense of loneliness in the presence of the great unknown. There it is, in its immensity, operating according to a natural law, opaque, silent, inscrutable, frequently cruel, and apparently uninterested in the lot of us poor human beings. Then, too, in the group which we call humanity, there is something massive, something immense, something in the preoccupation of individuals of social wholes, which make the individual person feel that he is alone and uncared for, and that his only possible policy is one of struggling with might and main to gain for himself by snatching from the whole what he can." Surely no one can read these words without appreciating the need they imply not only for persons who can see, quote, "see life steadily and see it whole," unquote, but who can demonstrate in their social and cosmic functionings the presence of divine purpose and of divine love. A second revolutionary front appears in the economic life. Consider the life story back of it. There come first those explorers who mapped the general contours of the land, who plotted mountain ranges, rivers, and plains. The next stage of discovery centered on mineral deposits and soil potentialities. Discovery then moved to the laboratory, where the manifold uses of the products of the soil were developed for the support of human society. Now, while these processes continue, other explorers turn to the discovery and the control of human resources. But in many of these areas, a single discovery will often create many problems. The invention of a labor-saving machine will in turn help to create unemployment. Thus the human, the natural, and the mechanical processes so interact upon one another that they cannot be entirely disentangled. This truth stands out, however, that in all relationships, persons are the key factors. We are now suffering a tremendous maladjustment in mechanical, economic, and social processes precisely because humans have subverted mechanical and natural processes to immoral purposes. But if out of the present turmoil we are to achieve more just and generous economic relationships, we shall need not simply new maxims, but new persons exhibiting Christ-like moral strength and unselfishness here as well as in other spheres of life. There is revolution, too, in morals. It is urged upon us that changes in the economic, social, and political structure of our society demand new or at least different moral standards. This argument everywhere seems to carry authority. If the great God change can be brought to the support of the proposition, that seems sufficient. While in a growing or expanding society, new statements of moral principles must be made to apply to newly developed relationships. The mere withdrawal of a standard does not meet the need. One ought to ask, therefore, whether the current demand for change is for the positive extension of tried and trusted moral ideals to meet new situations, or whether the ferment of time is used as a cover to urge the abandonment of all restriction upon impulse. Serious and penetrating criticisms of old standards with the view to determining their adequacy is one thing, but the repudiation of any standard because we dislike any kind of discipline is another. This revolution calls not merely for keen minds, but for persons of such moral strength that they can be trusted anywhere with anything, persons who can perceive the truth because they love the right. These are but examples of the ferment of our time. Need more to be cited? Is it not clear that anyone who drifts through such a time without developing and using his finest moral powers fails not only himself, but his family, his community, his nation? Seriously, then we will begin our examination. Chapter 3. I Am. When the French philosopher Descartes sets out to formulate his own thought about life, he decided to discard accepted systems of philosophy. He would use no proposition established by previous thinkers. He would begin with the first self-evident truth discoverable, and would himself reason out what followed logically from it. Many assumptions that at first appeared to be self-evident, he found in turn to depend upon something else being true. Finally, he came to the conclusion that nothing could be assumed except that he was thinking. Now, since I am thinking, he reasoned, I exist. No further proof of that was needed. We are not bent upon the same task as that of Descartes, but the one fact with which he began holds for us a tremendous interest. I am was indeed a small beginning for a philosopher. Yet that one solitary affirmation holds for us a baffling mystery. I am. But what am I? Surely some unique meaning lies hidden in that simple statement, for Jesus declared that persons are the most precious things produced by the universe. They are singly and collectively the objects of his greatest care and love. He sees in them such value that he is willing to undergo ignominious suffering, that he may reveal to them their own value and to make possible the full realization of it. First, let us ask, does that worth consist in what one owns? When I observe that men with large bank accounts and magnificent country homes actually do elicit more respect than coal miners, farmers, teachers, and preachers, I am convinced that to the majority of people, a man's value consists in the abundance of the things he possesses. But if that is a true measure, then Abraham Lincoln and God were wrong. Lincoln loved the poor, and God made them. No, God did not make them poor, but he made them. Jesus declared that a standard of measurement based on possessions is not only untrue, but foolish. He made classic the story of the grain farmer who judged worth by wealth. When after years of striving, the farmer succeeded in filling new barns with abundant grain, he rested, fully assured the happiness now consisted in the enjoyment of what he had gained. But his merriment was cut short by the summoning voice. Thou fool! This night thy soul shall be required of thee. If I am not merely what I own, am I merely body? I will not soon forget the sincerity and earnestness with which a classmate once dismissed religion along with philosophy, and everything dealing with the unreal. We were on a ferry from Staten Island to Manhattan, returning from a geological field trip. He was young and very much aware of his physical environment. When he examined quartz, he felt that he was dealing with something real and actual. The intangibles held no lure for him. But he did not follow out in his contacts with others the full consequences of his intellectual materialism. The interaction of our two minds at that moment was possible only because we could deal with the intangible ideas. My friend was simply interested deeply in the physical sciences, and he never stopped to think that the character of his interest and the process of sharing it with someone else were within the realm of what he called the unreal. But it is no less than a tragedy that from smaller beginnings than this, people do develop a pattern of habits and appreciations which assume that only that which can be handled, tasted, or smelled is real. A young man said to me recently, "The only satisfactory way to live is to act upon whatever impulse you have at the moment." That would be true if a person were nothing more than a physical machine. But consider, if one be nothing more than a functioning physical organism, he can be worth no more than the uses to which his body can be put. His happiness consists only in pleasing sensory excitement. He does not think, he merely responds to his environment. No training in psychology is needed to recognize that this estimate of one's life is untrue to his practical experience. Some chemist with a statistical turn of mind has estimated that the average human body weighs 150 pounds, stands 5 feet 10 inches, and consists of the following chemical elements: enough fat for 7 bars of soap, enough iron to make one nail of medium size, enough sugar to fill one shaker, enough lime to whitewash a chicken coop, enough phosphorus to make about 2,200 match tips, enough magnesium for 1 dose of magnesia, enough potassium to explode a toy cannon, with a small amount of sulfur mixed in. The entire amount can be purchased at a drugstore for less than $1. If the thoroughgoing cynical materialist is right in saying that the sum total of the reactions of this compound constitutes personality, then a man is nothing more than a bargain package of chemical elements. Suitable responses to his environment may indeed add an increment to varying amounts of the original investment, but at death even his interest is transferred to another's account, and the original ceases to exist. What a low value to place upon persons whom God so loved, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whomsoever believed in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. What a different view also from that of the psalmist who declared, "Thou hast made him, man, a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor." And what an astounding miracle that from a few cents worth of sugar, iron, fat, phosphorus, potassium, and small portions of other chemical elements can come Jesus, Isaiah, Plato, Galileo, Raphael, Bismarck, St. Francis, and a host of other saints, prophets, poets, painters, preachers, and statesmen. Just what relation is there between the small package of chemical elements in Plato's Republic, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the Kellogg Peace Pact, and the 13th chapter of the 1 Corinthians? No, it is too easy and too false to say, I am merely a body. Not that the body is to be regarded as menial or illusory. Jesus regarded the health of the body as so related to the health of the spirit, that he did not see a wide difference between commanding a palsied man to take his bed and walk, and assured him that his sins were forgiven. St. Paul declared that the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit and should not be defiled by uncleanness. The fact that the immediacy of the body has so absorbed our affect in the supplying its wants should not drive us to the opposite extreme of saying with Christian Science that it is illusory, or with ancient Zoroastrianism that it is essentially evil, sprung from the kingdom of darkness, but its significance is derived from its relationship with the Spirit, which the sage affirmed is the candle of the Lord. Man, like God, is in essence spirit, and he fulfills his purpose best when he lives and works upon the spiritual level. When George Tyrrell once said, quote, "Everyone has to be adequately fed, clothed, and sheltered. The question still remains what to do with life, unquote. There is apparently no rational purpose in mere eating to sustain the body to do work, to secure food to sustain the body to do more work, to secure more food, and so on in an endless circle of struggle and pleasure until the flesh runs its predestined course and decays. Man cannot yield to such sordid judgment upon his life, because rooted deep down in his nature is something that persists in proclaiming that, quote, through the ages one increasing purpose runs, unquote, and in bidding him find it. No, having once seen a gleam, man pursues it, down the ages, but half conscious that the joy is in the seeing, not in what we see, the ecstasy of vision, far and clear and free. This urge to do something higher expresses itself not only in the adventurous faith that there is, quote, more beyond, unquote, but in a demand for moral behavior with one's fellows. John Galsworthy had Matt Dennett express this appropriately in the play Escape. Matt had been sentenced to prison for 5 years on the charge of manslaughter, growing out of an accidental homicide. He escapes, is pursued by officers, but finally, after narrowly avoiding recapture, several times he hid in the vestry of a church. The rector remembers the trial, considers the imprisonment unjust, and touched by his visitor's worn, exhausted condition, seeks to divert the search elsewhere. The pursuing officers are about to leave the church when Matt steps from his hiding place and surrenders. To the minister, he offers as his reason for doing so when liberty is in sight, quote, it's one's decent self one can't escape, unquote. That same inner decency, hidden from the approval or disapproval of the observer, forced Jean Valjean, in the Victor Hugo novel, to confess to his fellow townsmen over whom he ruled as a popular mayor, that he was the escaped convict whom officers thought that they had captured in the person of another man. Though we may harbor a secret sin from the reproach of our fellows, our own decent self, until we kill him, will torment us at every contact with others. If personality embraces both body and spirit, and is capable of its highest fulfillment only on the spiritual level, in what, more precisely, does it consist? Since it is the object of divine love, it must be the most important thing in life. The real person must surely consist in something deeper and far more significant than corpuscles, neurons, and synaptic connections. The full realization of this true self constitutes life's main purpose. Chapter 4. Examination. Live your highest dreams. Express your true self. These are high commands, but they still leave us a bit confused. To them the will gives assent, but the mind cries, show me which is the true self. I am not one, but many. 6 Characters in Search of an Author is the title of a play by Luigi Pirandello. In it, a cast has been assembled on the stage of a theater to rehearse a new drama. But the work is halted when the 6 fantastic characters come up on the stage. To the stage manager, one explains, we bring you a drama, sir. We are 6 most interesting characters, sir. Another adds, sidetracked, however. When the manager inquires, but what do you want here, all of you? They reply in unison, we want to live in you. This may be merely a play and the intriguing characters, shadowy and tawdry, but they are types of the many possible characters that rise in us crying, we want to live in you. To attempt to provide a stage for all of them would be impossible, for they are often contradictory. To alternate between them would lead but to chaos. There comes one saying, I am excitement, I want to live in you. I can promise days and nights of adventure. I demand real sensation. Give me the stage and I will make life tingle with thrills. To that most of us cry, excellent. Come, live in me to the fullest. But it does not take us long to discover that mere sensation runs its course, wears itself out, and leaves us spent. Then comes comfort. I bring serenity, tranquility, and peace, he urges. What pictures those words conjure up in the mind of one who, like the prodigal son, has spent his resources in pursuit of thrills? The promise of peace and relaxation is captivating. We yield ourselves as a stage for this character to play upon, only to find that soon we are bored. Peace of mind, we discover, is not to be found by seeking it. Unto such a scene achievement comes with the welcome promise. You can never find what you seek in things that pertain to your selfish wants. Do something that has worth in it. Build something. Become a financier, a statesman, a pioneer in science of education. Achieve something objective. In that you will find pride, distinction, abundant satisfaction. Let me live in you. I am a hard master. I cannot provide a life of ease or thrill. I demand discipline, hard work, and persistence. But my rewards satisfy. Who could withstand that appeal? It calls into play not one impulse, but many. Its demands challenge, and its promises seem to connect us in some way to what is enduring, like the memory of a Lincoln, an Alexander the Great, or a Socrates. So with painstaking effort, we set the stage and invite the new actor to put on his show. But the audience fails to respond. Instead, we hear only criticism. Just be patient, urges achievement. I warned you that persistence is necessary. We stay on, but we begin to wonder if the game is worth the candle. Would you not do better to take the cash and let the credit go? A cynical voice within questions. Listen not to the voice of the cynic, a new character interposes. He can promise nothing that excitement and achievement did not offer. Both of them have deceived you. Achievement is demanding too much, and excitement shatters your nerves. Let me live in you. I am romance. I bring you beauty and joy. Enter into life with me. This imaginative encounter could be continued at length, but more of it would only be wearying. Life has already taught us that no one character can alone fulfill his promises. Pirandello's 6 characters have a potential drama in their relation to each other. This is also true of the relationship of the many selves that seek expression through us. They are in need of a stage manager who can cast them properly and bring out the latent moral drama within. In short, the full life does not result from the development of any one desire at the expense of the others. I have spoken here of a few of the desires frequently experienced. I might add many similar ones that arise in different areas of our nature. No one of them is of itself evil, but the oversatisfaction of one to the total neglect of the others is responsible for most moral evil. The viciousness of sensuality lies not in any inherent evil of normal physical appetite. Only when the physical subverts the mental and the moral cravings to its own end does it become definitely immoral. The sensualist can never be happy, for he outrages both his mind and his conscience. The lazy person sacrifices to confront his very real need of purposeful activity. The coward offends his self-respect by over-concern for security, and the tyrant thwarts his desire for affection in favor of power. Thus, the development of any one's life vital urges at the expense of others lays waste our powers and renders our activity futile. Each of our articulate desires, however, represents a definite organization of more elemental impulses. Frequently, our conflict is fostered by those simpler, disorganized drives, Tennyson asks, quote, "Where is one that born of woman altogether can escape from the lower world within him, moods of tiger and of ape?" End quote. To be sure, no one can. The tiger, dark anger, often attempts to take the stage, while the ape, meaningless imitation of others, does too often get the better of us. Tennyson's list is but a mere beginning, for at times we feel that an entire animal show has been released upon us. These wild impulses are matched by tendencies towards altruism, self-sacrifice, friendship, love, and service. Sometimes one type has the upper hand, and sometimes the other, but the ideal of self-realization soon comes face to face with the inner turmoil that their conflict induces. Different modes of life, individual desires, and numerous single impulses clamor to live in us. Where is the stage manager who can put each in its place and allow the true self to emerge? St. Paul must have had this agony of spirit in mind when he cried, "O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death?" One answer to the question is, secure a life purpose of such attraction and worth that all desires, impulses, and aspirations may be absorbed by it. Who keeps one end in view makes all things serve. The principle is sound, for human powers find their best uses not through suppression, but through expression. No, this does not mean undisciplined freedom for any one impulse. On the contrary, it calls for the unified expression of all capacities. One disciplines another when all are employed in an enterprise of sufficient variety to challenge the whole personality. In such devotion, love does not overcome indignation or even anger. Rather, the apparently opposing tendency fuse in an active habit of goodwill. One supplies the goal of conduct and the other motive power. Without this attractive object of loyalty, the petty vexations and the trivial duties of life make the struggle of existence unendurable. From it, the petty and the trivial derive their justification. In her Song of the Lark, Willa Cather has one of the principal characters, a girl who is struggling against odds to maintain her ideals, affirm, but it's silly to live at all for little things. Living's too much trouble unless one can get something big out of it. Only, she adds, if you want a big thing, you've got to have nerve enough to cut out all that's easy. Everything that's to be had cheap. These are moments when an impulse to evil has to be restrained by sheer knowledge that it's bad or foolish. No one would deny that negative discipline is necessary, but as a method of controlling our powers, it has definite limitations. For human nature is dynamic, and over-suppression only ignites combustible elements. Only for meeting a specific instance of temptation, one needs the luring picture of himself as he fits into a scheme or a plan which excludes the proposed conduct. Consider Jesus in his wilderness tests. Should we be entirely wrong if we said that one of the valuable powers at his command was the desirable picture he held in his mind of a life and loyalty that offered satisfaction far more real and enduring than the material and personal advantages suggested by the tempter? One does not give up the cheap, the easy, or even the bad solely by the exercise of sheer willpower. The nerve to cut out these things comes from a power outside ourselves to which we give our allegiance. The object of our devotion must not only be fascinating and inclusive, it must be good. The cruel and calculating exploiter, the successful criminal, as well as the saint, is moved by a dominating purpose. The character of the life purpose marks the difference between Nero and St. Paul, between Jane Addams and a gangster, and where, amid the maddening maze of things, and tossed by storm and flood, can we find the life purpose so good, so fascinating that we should gladly surrender all of it, the pearl of so rare a value that we joyously exchange all we possess for it? If we turn to our personal desires and designate one as a captain of the soul, we only set the stage for mutiny among the remaining members of the crew. Thus our survey describes the qualities of life motive must have. It must be powerful, fascinating, morally good, and more inclusive than personal life. Chapter 5. Purpose. Many inclusive ideals immediately present themselves for our study. One ideal often suggested is a personally satisfying and socially useful occupation. That one's daily work is a necessity that preempts much of his time and energy, gains for it a place of importance. In fact, education, art, and indeed often religion wait upon provisions for creature existence. The four necessities, food, clothing, shelter, and transportation, absorb most of the world's work. To what purpose is all this struggle? For what end do millions of women wash again and again the same dishes, make the same beds day after day, prepare the same number of meals from year to year, and dust over and over the same furniture? Can we justify the constant outpouring of life's energies by millions of factory workers, office employees, executives, statesmen, and designers of all types? Is it not all, as Haeckel affirmed, quote, a terrible and useless struggle for existence, unquote, unless there is meaning over and above mere survival? One's occupation as a means of subsistence, therefore, has social and moral meaning only as it serves to support persons who exhibit in themselves values that transcend physical survival. It is true that there are physiological and psychological and hence moral benefits in work that engages one's time and energy in a constructive and orderly fashion. But the type of work that most people are required to do is not gauged to this purpose. It is, in fact, often inimical to it. Thus, the value of an occupation is relevant to the type of life it supports. Even the service vocations fall under this qualification, for they have a twofold aim: to support those engaging in them, and more particularly, to foster and maintain certain habits and values generally recognized as of singular importance. So that while a socially useful occupation is important to one's moral and spiritual welfare, it is not good enough nor inclusive enough to serve as a center around which to organize one's entire life. The exception should doubtless be made for some of the service professions, though certainly not all of them. It is an indisputable fact, nevertheless, that most people do accommodate the rest of their lives to their daily work. They have to. Most of them would contend that this situation is far from ideal, and that it is due in part of man's collective sins. He has not yet developed an organization of society designed to support the highest values of personality. although motive suggested is that of happiness, and immediately it gains advantage over occupation, because occupation can be subordinated to it. One may have a great deal of satisfaction from assurance that his work not only makes possible the maintenance of his family in security and comfort, but also supports communal life in many aspects. The ideal of happiness needs further study, for at all people strive in one way or another. This striving Carlyle characterized as an attempt to, quote, make of the universe a swine's trough from which human beings may extract the maximum of pig's wash, end quote. Our efforts to secure happiness, he affirmed, are prompted by our own conceit. Quote, we fancy that some reward is due to us, but we rate ourselves too high. It would be well for us to fancy rather that we deserve to be hanged. Then we would feel it happiness to be only shot, end quote. In contrast to Carlyle's attitude, Robert Louis Stevenson, who was well acquainted with suffering, believed it not only a duty to try to be happy, but a duty to try to make others happy. He prayed, if I have faltered more or less in my great task of happiness, if I have moved among my race and shown no glorious morning face, if beams from happy human eyes have moved me not, if morning skies, books, and my food, and summer rain knocked on my sullen heart in vain, Lord, thy most pointed pleasure take, and stab my spirit broad awake. Which position is the nobler? Was Carlyle's cynicism due to his melancholy temperament and his repeated attacks of dyspepsia, or to his dislike of things easy and his recognition that the greatest souls have not sought happiness for themselves? Did Stevenson recognize, on the other hand, that despite disappointments and handicaps, the gallantry, generosity, and heroism of Earth's choice spirits have been prompted by the spiritual satisfactions that they provided? The objections of thinking persons are lodged most frequently not against happiness in itself, but against seeking it for itself. They realize that it is not so much an object to be sought, but a kind of overtone to activities that carry their own intrinsic value, a kind of interest on a life well invested. Many suppose that if they lived under different circumstances, they would be much happier. This is no doubt true for numbers who are deprived of food, shelter for themselves and their families. One is not normally happy through constant hunger and cold. This truth stands out, however, that comfort and security do not bring happiness. The world is full of people who, though they live in ease, are bored to desperation. Mr. John Balterston, the well-known author of Berkeley Square, has given us a spicy portrayal of this, in fact, in a more recent piece entitled A Morality Play for the Leisure Classes. In the play, one who has died wakes up in the other world to find that he is surrounded by luxury. An extremely courteous attendant assures him that when he becomes tired of his present environment, he has only to make the request and it will be changed. Soon he does ask for his suite to be made over in the style of Louis XIV. It is done immediately, but he soon tires of this and wishes that he might be given surroundings marked by the simple and refined taste of ancient Greece. This, too, it is instantly granted. He has only to mention a book, a painting, or anything else he wishes, and it is immediately provided. Months pass, and he begins to feel bored. One day, he says quarrelsomely to his obliging attendant, I am sick and tired of this everlasting ease. I want to wish for something I can't have without working for it. The servant informs him that this is one human desire that cannot be satisfied in the world in which he lives now. He loses his temper and scolds. In that case, I do not care to stay here. I would prefer to go to hell. To which the servant replies, and where do you think you are, sir? If then happiness is not to be found by searching for it, it cannot serve as the central principle of conduct, for it is dependent on still other more inclusive values. The ideal of unselfish service seems promising. If we inquire what is the meaning of service, we are met with a simple and thankful reply. It is helping others, promoting their happiness and welfare. It does not stop with feeding the hungry and clothing the naked. It includes any effort designed to strengthen or develop in persons worthier attitudes and nobler habits. But why is it important to serve others if they in turn can find meaning in life only by projecting themselves into others' lives through service? Those whom we serve must have real and intrinsic value in themselves if our ministry is to carry any moral worth. Laudable as the ideal of service is, then, it is insufficient as the pivotal center of life. It is not an end in itself, but a means to other worthy ends. That this is true is evident when we recall that service is a sharing of something. We either give of ourselves or something material. If our sharing has any real significance, the reason is that we share something of worth with someone who needs it. The transaction involves both the standard of values for us and for those whom we share. Further examples of inadequate interest will hardly be necessary. Already it is apparent that while activities and ideals of the type here considered are very noble, they are insufficient for our purpose. Many people no doubt live a very successful and happy life simply by selecting a specific set of activities, through which they work out their ideals, without actually stopping to consider what is the central motive that unifies all of these in one whole pattern. Yet such a motive is present, sometimes consciously appreciated and cultivated, but quite as frequently inarticulate and entirely unrecognized. A rich life flows through many and diverse channels: home, occupation, friendship, and many others. But this diversity does not result from any lack of pattern. A sufficient life purpose demands many vehicles for its expression. Anyone who is convinced that there is no rational pattern in life, as a whole, cannot escape a sense of futility. Whether one is entirely overcome by it depends upon one's temperament. When the son of Mr. Louis Untermeyer, the poet, committed suicide while a student in Yale University, his father said, quote, "My son saw no reason in life, and so none for it. All of us today do not know what the reason for life is. We do not understand life. Anyone pretends to is bluffing." End quote. We may question his statement of fact concerning our ability to understand life. His conclusion, however, the reason for life is based upon the reason in life is sound. This suggests that an adequate life purpose will have to be derived from our larger cosmic environment. If the larger life, in which we as single individuals are but small incidents, is irrational, then it is futile to find purpose in ourselves. If our larger world is but a collection of blind forces, each struggling in a crazy, drunken manner for supremacy, we are merely pawns in the hands of power we cannot understand. But if it is true that the universe is an orderly, intelligent process governed by a thoroughly rational and loving God, then we can discover both reason in and reason for life. Beyond this, we can find for ourselves a personal meaning and function that will make living a high adventure.
Chapter 6. We Belong. Does it matter, many will ask, what notions we have about the world and our relationship to it? Is it not far more important that we live right? If one has ideals and molds his life according to them, isn't that sufficient? May we not leave troublesome intellectual questions outside our present quest? To begin with, the contrast drawn in the question is unfounded. The immediate and concrete questions of conduct do involve one's status in his world. Consider how the two become mixed in the thoughts of the writer of Ecclesiastes, a book in the Old Testament. This writer believed that there is a God, but one far removed from the affairs of man and quite beyond the mind of man to comprehend. He was uncertain as to whether the God is friendly or unfriendly to man's effort to be good. He was, furthermore, uncertain as to what constitutes the good towards which man might strive. It is better, no doubt, he concluded, to be wise than foolish, but alas, the more one knows, the more he suffers. Anyway, whatever one does, the grave spells oblivion. So there is nothing in this life really worthwhile. That thought offered some consolation, however, for he, quote, judged the dead already in their graves to be more happy than the living who were still alive. Yes, and happier than both the man unborn, who has never known the misery that goes on in this world. End quote. Can it be denied that his conclusions are logical? It does make a difference whenever one sees himself as an uncertain quantity, as did Ecclesiastes, or as the child of a loving God, as did the writer of 1 John. Quote, now we are the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be, end quote, is a conviction underlying the faith that the power which made and sustains the world is not only available to men, but is friendly to a man's aspirations, indeed creates and sustains them too. At this point, perhaps, arises one of the principal problems of the modern youth. The question of our cosmic relationship turns out to be far more than intellectual. It is moral and religious. Very few modern youth would deny that there is some power in the world that underlies existence, and our description of that power determines largely our estimate of life. Even so iconoclastic a thinker as Haeckel, who saw in life only a useless, quote, struggle for existence, unquote, gave that very struggle a universal meaning. It provides, he affirmed, quote, the real impulse to the blind course of the world, unquote. If it is to be objected that many thinkers who have no faith in God have, nevertheless, found sufficient meaning in the life of man, let us inquire of one of the most brilliant leaders. Mr. Joseph Wood Crutch, in his Modern Temper, answers the objection well. There is nothing in the world above man that sustains any friendly relationship to him. To be sure, there is a generative power of the universe, but the universe is completely indifferent to man. In fact, there is, quote, no reason to suppose that his own life has any more meaning than the life of the humblest insect that crawls from one annihilation to another, end quote. His science and his art are ultimately futile. Already love is coming to be recognized not as a, quote, thing of beauty, unquote, but simply as a biological drive, all that it ever was intended to be. The best he can claim as a life purpose is a noble defiance. How different that from the faith of, quote, those who love God, those who have been called in terms of his purpose, have his aid and interest in everything, end quote. Contrast the two. Crutch, noble defiance. Paul, if God is for us, who can be against us? Still, there are those who urge that the practical will to live and the wisdom of cooperation among men and moral behavior on part of the individuals are quite sufficient. Apart from the intellectual doubters, they point out, there are thousands of ordinary people who have shut religion out of their lives. In place of the worship of God on Sundays, they play golf, work in the garden, or lie in bed. Their weekdays are filled with their occupation and an exacting social schedule. They live moderately happy and contented lives and contribute no small sum to the general welfare of their communities. They are not bothered about God. These people, however, are far more dependent upon religious faith than they realize. They could not carry on their work and continue cooperative relationships with their fellow men unless they assume that the world in which they live in contains influences that sustain their efforts and is friendly to moral ideals. They believe in God, though their belief is inarticulate and generally would never be recognized as religion. The fact is, consciously or unconsciously, we live in a definite conception of our cosmic environment. If we have no faith that we confess, if we take no pains to work out a consistent interpretation, we take over one ready-made, or we piece one together out of practical issues of life. Our conception of whatever sustains life may range all the way from a positive calumny of God to devout worship. The point here is that whatever our view is consciously accepted or remains inarticulate, it influences profoundly the motives by which we live. Is there any justification for believing that we belong to a, quote, heavenly Father, unquote, who knows all of our needs, who looks upon us through eyes of love, and seeks to guide us in, quote, the way everlasting, unquote? That question is perhaps not as easy to answer as when men could count the stars, when he knew the whole universe centered in the earth. Modern science has shattered this cozy little nook and thrown us out into a universe the boundaries of which are beyond our vision. Consider this graphic description of the galaxies by Dr. Henry Norris Russell, a well-known astronomer. Our sun is so large that if some huge genie, greater than any dreamed of in the Arabian Nights, could sit beside it and ladle world upon world from its molten mass, he could pour 3,000 worlds like our own into 8,000-mile molds and still not use up 1/100th of the sun. Yet the sun, in a universe of suns, is a very ordinary, middle-sized star. The seeming drift of mist in our sky, which we call the Milky Way, is a galaxy composed of hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of stars, many of them larger than this colossal sun. And beyond our visions are other galaxies, swarming in new heavens, on and on. Our great telescopes reveal more than 50 million galaxies. Our deepest sounding of space find no bottom. We have not reached the limit, and there is more beyond. What a challenge to him who is tired of his sky. To many it is inconceivable that, quote, the power behind all this, end quote, can have any real regard for human life. Here is order, purpose, and power on a scale so colossal that it overwhelms the imagination. Perhaps the sense of bigness and order underlies the feeling of futility that confounds the intellectuals like Mr. Crutch. Says one, quote, if my general observations of nature support anything, they lead merely to the conclusion that there is an inexorable law working out its purpose without reference to moral ideals or values. It might be called fate, realizing her destiny. Anyone who gets in her way, even inadvertently, suffers. Where men blind by chance happen to fall into her purpose, they receive her aid. And where they by blind chance cross her ways, they are crushed, end quote. And if we ask him to be more specific, he will reply, quote, there is not the slightest hesitation upon the part of nature to destroy all, even whole communities who stand in the way of earthquakes or floods, end quote.
all of which we have readily to admit. But our skeptic has had the floor long enough. Let us examine him at close range. He has said only one thing, namely, that the reality working in the world is dependable. It has no caprices. By using such horror-inspiring words as inexorable and fate, he has drawn a black veil over a very important truth. Could we, if we had the choice, trust our lives in the hands of a power that is capricious, favors this person or that place according to whim, or even for a considerable bribe? The first requirement of power worthy of our devotion is that it is dependable and trustworthy, that our skeptic has already proclaimed for us. He returns to the fray, however, to declare that this power is not only dependable, it works for a definite purpose. All its processes contribute to that end. Again, we reply, quote, that it is the second requirement that we should set. The object of our devotion must have a plan that includes not only the physical world, but human society, end quote. The trouble is, our skeptic insists, that his plan appears to exclude humans, or at least make them incidental. His real plan is to create a huge machine. Men may be regarded as pieces in this machine, but they are not ends in themselves. Witness the indiscriminate cruelty of nature to any who get in her way. The word appears should be underscored in that last speech, for the appearance of reducing man to an incidental factor in the universe is highly superficial. This speaker has fallen into the error common to most skeptics. He has ignored a vast range of evidence to be drawn from human experience. All his data came from the natural order. Let us take a swift view of the whole. By what logic can you account for the appearance in human history of intelligence and moral consciousness, if not that the groans of creation have ever been pointed not only to the development of life, but to human personality, thinking, aspiring, believing, and willing human minds? To serve as an adequate environment for the growth of intelligent persons who understand and adjust themselves to its processes, the physical world naturally has to operate according to dependable law. Similarly, the moral world, which is quite as real as the physical world, has to exhibit dependable moral laws in order to produce and cultivate the moral consciousness. That our world has actually, at the highest level of life, produced moral aspiration is a fact that requires for an explanation of Creator whose primary aim is expressed in personality. That intellectual, aesthetic, spiritual, and moral values stand at the crown of creation. Such leading scientists as Professor Arthur Compton and Arthur Stanley Eddington now maintain. But religious insight has fortunately not had to wait for this tardy support from science. Long before science discovered that our universe is an orderly system, religion declared, quote, "The Lord hath in wisdom founded the earth. He hath established the heavens in understanding." Long before science could work through its mass of data to accord man a new dignity in the scale of things, religious defined that he was merely an incidental factor. It affirmed that he was only, quote, "a little lower than the angels," end quote, a co-worker with God in creation. Such a position could not have been given him had he not lived in a physical and moral world whose laws are dependable. If men had always been protected from every danger, they would now be something less than persons. Intelligence and moral insight have enabled men who love the truth so to relate themselves to God and his world that they have enjoyed the highest spiritual rewards. There is, however, a recalcitrant streak in nature that prompts many to evade the requirements of moral as well as the physical life. Against those who, quote, "try to get by," end quote, God uses his law as an instrument of instruction to draw them back to him. Another question is raised by the skeptic concerning the relation of a good purpose in human experience. Think, he urges, of great social catastrophes such as the World War and the more recent economic depression. Can you stretch your imagination enough to see in them evidences of a good and righteous spirit working for the production of ideal personality? The answer is that not imagination, but spiritual insight lays hold of that very interpretation of these events. Consider the avarice, the self-assertion, and the greed that produced the war and the depression. If these powerful and evil influences could, without coming to judgment, work out their purposes, destroy the souls of the powerful as well as the bodies of the weak, there would indeed be some question as to the goodness of God. The utter collapse of a social pattern based upon cruelty is a dramatic demonstration of the truth that we live in a moral universe and that her laws are not without force. Many people act as though the moral law were as frail as a piece of rare china and could not stand against the hard realities of human sin.
Had they the insight to recognize it, they would perceive its sturdy quality. Men do not break the law of gravitation. As one put it, a man attempting to defy it by jumping from a cliff only illustrates it. Neither do men break the moral law. Those who attempt it only illustrate its dependability. Our survey has so far established that our ideas about our cosmic environment do have a determining influence upon our conduct, that the power which made and sustains our magnificent universe is on the side of man's best effort, and that he is actively working in the moral realm. The fear that God is so occupied in the affairs that we have been discussing that he has very little time for persons troubles many. Someone will ask, if our earth is so small, and the complete universe so incomprehensibly large, can we believe that God really gives us any attention? Would he have time for us? Such questions as these indicate that most people have given little thought to religion since childhood. They imply that God is thought of in sitting in some huge throne room controlling affairs in his vast works by remote control. In other areas, our thought have adjusted to the new knowledge that we have gained from time to time about our physical universe. But we still talk as if our discoveries of the dynamic forces working in the world have nothing to do with religion. Dr. Russell, the astronomer, whom we quoted a while ago, reminds us that our new conceptions of the universe have come to us by looking more deeply into it. He urges also that by earnestly exploring farther our religious faith, we can discover for ourselves a deeper and more comprehensive meaning in God. Has it not occurred to us that God is just as near in the larger process of this larger world as he is with our smaller world? He is not in some far-off chamber beyond the stars studying a chart of their movements. He is here, increasingly revealing his resources through the creative processes of time and events. Even the clash of world forces in economic and political affairs gradually teaches men the wisdom of his way, the way of goodwill. There come again the words of Jesus, and with fresh meaning. God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. If we regard the world as God's body, and the spiritual laws of the universe as his mind, we should have a vital point of contact for each individual. For at both the physical and spiritual levels, his activity would embrace us. The truth is that no life is quite complete until it is consciously related to the source of all being. As an ancient long ago affirmed, the heart is made for God, and it is restless until it rests in him. Until one has the faith that the universe is the home both of God and his children, that it is genuinely moral, and that it offers each individual the opportunity of unlimited moral and spiritual adventure, he cannot live with adequate assurance. Chapter 7. Assurance. Constant and genuine assurance. For that our spirits yearn. But can we really enjoy it? Must we not face increasing uncertainty? God, the power that made us and sustains us, can he be as much a part of our daily experience as a friend? The discussion in our last chapter led inevitably to the problem, a problem that is real to an increasing number of people. It is a personal problem. Hundreds find no difficulty in accepting the proposition that nature properly interpreted reveals an intelligent, purposeful, and moral power operating in the world. They would agree, moreover, that man's highest good depends upon establishing proper relations with that power. But to know an inner certitude and confident assurance that God maintains personal relations with each of his children seems to them quite unthinkable. The loss of this assurance, they agree, is unfortunate. Unfortunate? It is tragic. That this is true finds abundant confirmation in the mediocre religious attainments of those who live without it. Their plight is that of one who, seated before a well-laden table, is hungry but does not reach out for food because he cannot see what is before him. The truth is that even many people with very devout habits actually have this lack. They pray under such strain and anxiety that one is sure there is not between them and God the kind of glad confidence that radiates from Jesus' address, Our Father. This characteristic, uncertainty and indefiniteness, was well summarized by a conscientious deacon. When asked for his notion of God, he admitted that to him, God was a, quote, vague oblong blur, end quote. Now contrast this vague impersonal power or principle, which is the only God that thousands of people know, with the God worshipped by our grandfathers. He was a very definite and picturable deity, one who could confidently, perhaps almost familiarly, be addressed as Father, who could be sought for guidance and strength very much as one might ask help of a profoundly revered human advisor. Above all, one who heard personal petition and could be depended upon to answer it directly and explicitly. It was not expected that he would always change the course of nature to one's behest, but he might certainly be expected to influence the health or thought of a friend. In every instance, he would furnish a definite reply, which could be recognized as the will of God in those circumstances. Henry P. Van Dusen. Must we conclude that for our day that type of religious assurance is not possible? Are we to be content with a life lived by principle? If we decide to be done with anything short of the best, to seek more than a feeble, evanescent faith, we shall face two difficulties. One comes from the scientific habit of requiring fact. Those who are limited by this habit will say that while in nature and society, generally an order of law is discoverable, the claim of divine guidance does not yield itself to a factual study. Suppose that we do look for the facts, however, not in nature only, but also in human consciousness. Does it mean nothing that we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, both ancient and modern, who have actually lived under confident assurance of God's presence, and who have exhibited not only serenity of spirit, but extraordinary religious insight? The reason many suppose that such assurance is beyond the test of fact is that they look in the wrong place for their facts. Nature may agree with what the human heart actually experiences, but the true road to God is not out of man into physical world, it lies in the soul. To be sure, many have misinterpreted their inner experiences. Self-deception is always an ever-present danger. But there are ways of testing one's inner witness, the most reliable of which takes account into the type of conduct that flows from it. Actually, this is the test to which all religious leaders have been subjected by the moral judgment of the race. Not only John Wesley and Paul, but Jesus himself. Suppose that we have nothing from Jesus but a few statements to the effect that love is the law of life, and that he was being guided by a spirit whose essence is love. He might be known, but most assuredly he would not be followed. It is not alone the Jesus who taught by precept that men lovingly embrace. It is the concrete embodiment of his teachings in his life and death that captivates. His deeds gave wings to his words, so that though he wrote nothing, they have braved the inaccuracies of human transmission, and have brought light and life to one generation after another. In short, he has more than stood the test. When man's inner faith stands the test of moral deeds, it may be confidently trusted. It belongs to the realm of accepted fact. Another difficulty in the way of personal assurance arises from the definition of God as spirit. God does not possess individuality as does a friend with whom we may converse. The friend has a body we may see and a voice we may hear, but God has neither of those. How then can we be aware of his abiding presence? Look into this question a little more closely. Is it not true that the friend with whom we converse is not immediately present to the senses? His personality consists not in physical characteristics, but in qualities of mind, intelligence, will, appreciation. True, the differentiating qualities of that friend are apprehended by the character of his movements and his words as they register in the visual and auditory awareness. Then another aspect of consciousness comes into action. Because we appreciate certain moral, social, and spiritual values, we make a judgment upon the real friend whose presence is signaled by his overt conduct registered in the senses. The character we judge and the we who do the judging are not concrete things at all. We are sure of their reality because consciousness has been trained to perceive them. Now to the consciousness that has had its moral and spiritual awareness developed, the data that registers the presence of the eternal spirit is just as real as that which registers the presence of a friend. There are many pathways to God, but they all lie in the sensitivity of the soul. If God is a spirit, so is man, and a man does not live at his highest level until he transcends the physical and develops his spiritual nature. Even as the physical universe and the mind of God are not unrelated, so the body and the spirit of man are not unrelated. One is the vehicle of the other. Man's body does not realize its fullest glory until it enters the service of a soul in active and confident relations with the eternal spirit. Religious assurance, therefore, turns out to be a personal venture. What we learn about God cannot be determined by the logical structure we set up. He will reveal himself to us in ways of his own choosing. Principal Jacks, of England, tells of one man who sought in various ways to acquire the feeling of God's immediate presence, but to no avail. One day while walking, he suddenly became conscious of the firm and reliable pressure of the earth under his feet, In a moment, his world came alive for him, and God seemed no longer distant. A young mother whose husband had died became so bitter that she defied God and all that was associated with his name. She suffered not only in the grief of a bereavement, but the moral deterioration that resulted from the poison of her rebellion. The most endurable moment of the day came when with her little son she would go out with on a lofty crag from which she could look across the valley to a companion peak behind which the setting sun slowly hid himself. The beauty of the sunset sky and the hues created by the slanting rays of yellow sunlight captivated her. Day after day she came and watched. Imperceptibly, her bitterness melted and went away until one day she suddenly awoke to a deep and comforting sense of kinship with the master artist. Numerous are the ways and the situations through which man come upon assurance of comradeship with God, beauty of nature, a profound friendship with another person, a moment of severe disappointment or defeat, a moment of exaltation, a service of worship, silent meditation, the processes of creation. These are but examples. Probably more often it comes as a result of moral adventure. Jesus taught that anyone who undertakes to do the will of God shall be informed of what that will is. That is to say that to anyone who will sincerely turn himself toward God and will meet the necessary moral conditions, God will respond in a recognizable fashion. Through adjustment of ourselves to God's way, we will come to know Him. This adjustment includes genuine appreciation of spiritual and moral ideals, centering attention upon God as the power that is friendly to these ideals, complete surrender of self to this power, an active faith which affirms that because of the real presence of the divine, our ideals are becoming real, and sincere willingness on our part to respond instantly to what our best intelligence indicates is the will of God. Persistence in this frame of mind until all mental objection to it is overcome. And finally, the sincere intention to make it our permanent disposition. That last sentence follows closely to the thought of Dr. Douglas C. McIntosh on what he calls, quote, a right religious adjustment, unquote. To me, it appears to be a thoroughly adequate description of one way to enter into reliable confidence that God the Father is closer even than breathing, that He is the active divine presence in our experience in which we may place our implicit trust. It includes both the distinctly moral and religious elements. It steers off the magical elements that seem to cling to a mystical experience. It makes religious worship a natural and normal interaction between the spirit of man and the source of his life. If this affirmation of God's presence and guiding influence in daily life seems to extract Him from the incomprehensible activities of the universe, let us recall that our experience does not exhaust His interests and powers. We know Him at the near side, but His far side extends forever beyond our more distant horizons. Indeed, it is His illimitable capacity to create distance, height, and depth in both the physical and the moral realms that gives us unconquerable faith in the security of His near presence. Its assurance enables men to ride out storms that surpass their ability even to understand. Martin Luther, who was the center of forces that threatened to completely overwhelm him, could, because of his confident trust, write, a mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing, our helper He, amid the flood of moral ills prevailing. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. Were not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. And though this world, with demons filled, should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed His truth to triumph through us. Chapter 8. Conversation. Communion with God suggests definite expressions of His disposition towards us. Friendship with persons is fostered primarily through some form of conscious interaction. We speak to a friend, we smile, we shake hands, we help him perform some tasks. And in return, we hear him speak to us, we see his responding smile, and we know definitely that he has given expression to a feeling of goodwill towards us. Always where there is a vital conscious relationship between persons, there are definite and recognizable instances in which they have expressed their attitude towards each other. And this attitude is not that of standard or mechanical reaction. It is vital, the result of an immediate decision. It might be said that we enter into fellowship with Plato or Kant when we read and understand their writings. We may feel that we know them fairly well, and that certain ideas of our own would be heartily approved by them. because we believe their recorded opinions correspond with what we now think. But this kind of fellowship is not a living contemporary experience. It is rather an imaginative communion with the past. A living relationship is that established between living persons whose attitudes are fluid and subject to change. Now, can our fellowship with God be a present vital experience in which we are conscious of His immediate disposition towards us? Or must we be content with the reasoned assurance that our conduct corresponds to principles recorded, let us say, in the New Testament, and that we must, therefore, be doing the will of God? Dr. E. Stanley Jones, the famous missionary evangelist to India, has often asserted that the major decisions of his life have all been dictated by an inner voice, which clearly and unmistakably revealed to him God's present plans for him. Many others would join Dr. Jones in affirming that in their relationship, both private and public, they have inner assurances of a presence, which is nearer to them and more real than hands and feet. But Dr. Jones does not give his inner voice the character of an occult power that speaks audibly in the manner of an oracle. It is rather a certitude of conviction upon which he acts with confidence. The ordinary person, however, usually has no notion of what to expect when he asks for divine guidance. He feels vaguely that he must not credit convictions that come to him through his own intelligence, that in some way or another God's direction will come, if at all, through channels separate from his own mental capacities. The Oxford Group movement has popularized the phrase quiet time. This name is given to periods of silence in which the mind is given over to the Spirit of God, who at such times is expected to give personal directions to those waiting upon him. While the practices of this group have served to call attention to a rather general neglect of the inner life, the conscientious critic will want to know if the wholesale use of this method of seeking divine guidance is not open to deceptions of a serious character. He will ask, is it psychologically possible for one to receive guidance through other than his own mind and will, disciplined by a consistent moral effort and a settled purpose to do God's bidding? Will not the assumption that the message we seek comes from someone wholly exterior to our own minds rather encourage us to rationalize our own desires as the will of God? Or again, he will ask, does not this over-concern for a special ruling from God on all our acts tend to reduce our religion and our worship to the plane of the trivial? The fact that many persons in this group are known constantly to seek guidance as to what suit or dress they will wear on any given occasion, as to what time or what restaurant they will eat lunch, rather than as to their part in some more significant and moral and religious challenges of our time, does, in my opinion, justify the devout person in refusing to identify himself with such special movements as the Oxford Group. Their excessive and often inconsequential guidance certainly is not what the average religious person means when he speaks of communion with God. But this criticism is not meant to minimize the essential motives of the Oxford Group, nor to deny that many of their members have, through their special techniques, entered into a close walk with God. My objection to all such extraordinary procedures is that they imply that God is a very difficult sort of person to reach, and that because their specialized procedures are set up as unfailing, they often lead to artificial results. Those whose genuine communion with God is manifest beyond doubt are usually the very ones to disclaim any special spiritual achievement. The saints of all ages have been those most conscious of their own moral and religious deficiency. Usually, too, it may be said that persons like Dr. Jones have no elaborate or standard technique concerning the efficiency of which they seek to convince others. They have simply been with God, walked with Him, talked with Him, and responded wholeheartedly to Him. On the sincerity and consistency of moral effort and as a condition of religious insight, we have already had something to say. Let us now look at the more direct means of conversing with and responding to God. Prayer at its best is conversation with God. To be sure, many people who say prayers never pause to hear God's side of the conversation. In fact, they give Him no opportunity to speak to them. And, for that reason, their prayers turn out to be vain words. Their difficulty arises from their interpretation of prayer. They do not regard it as direct communion with the presence of vital and effective power, but rather as the payment of a premium on a fire insurance policy they have taken out with a celestial company. They are vaguely conscious of the dangers that beset both the physical and spiritual life of man. But they have absorbed enough of the modern science to be quite sophisticated about the intervention of a personal God. They cannot escape the feeling, however, that beyond the immediate movements of men and events, there is a well-organized system of government that exercises remote control over us. By saying prayers at regular intervals, they expect to keep the protection of divine power. In some extra-rational manner, they expect to be delivered from the untimely death, disappointment, failure, and grave moral temptation. At a very early age, I gained the impression that God was pleased with much praying. I decided, therefore, that I should pray 3 times a day. I felt no special moral or spiritual need. The act of bowing upon my knees and saying words that belonged to the language of prayer, I thought, would in some manner increase my accumulating merit. Ordinarily, these prayers were to be said morning, noon, and night. But if in the afternoon I suddenly remembered that I had not prayed according to my plan, I would redivide the time as to get my 3 prayers in before bedtime. This was an extremely crude interpretation of religious devotion, but it was not original to me. I had absorbed it from the Christian community of which my family and I were members. The truth is that many people never get beyond such a notion of prayer, and for them, what could be more natural than giving up the habit entirely? Once they discover that this repetition of words does not render them safe from those conditions of the physical and moral life against which they have been insured. There is, of course, in this notion something resembling magic. The repetition of words in the language of Christian devotion for mechanical effect upon a deity wholly exterior to man does not differ essentially from the ringing of bells, wearing a charm, or repeating magical formulas. It is no wonder that people who pray in this manner have not known vital, personal, reciprocal interaction with a living, loving, divine person. Others regard prayer as a grab bag out of which they get the most desirable things free of charge. They may precede their petitions with thanksgiving, but only that the petition may be more effective. If prayer cannot get for them what they want, it is useless. This might be true if their wants were right, but those who beg constantly in their prayers, "Give me," or even "give us," usually allow no divinity to say what shall be given. As children, they may have been taught to pray for the things they wanted, but could not supply themselves. Their parents may have found some pleasure in slyly playing God. At any rate, after praying for the satisfaction of human wants for a while without the desired result, they decide they have been fooled, and so abandon the whole procedure. One might even want moral power, or genuine religious insight, but if he sought it through a mechanical use of prayer, withholding himself from a hearty response to the will and purposes of God, he will be disappointed. When prayer is effective, the person praying fulfills at least a minimum of necessary conditions. For one, he approaches God in a humble and inquiring attitude. He wishes heartily to hear God speak to him. If he expresses his desires, he waits, and with the eyes of the Spirit searches God's countenance to see if these wants have his approval. If he discovers that God cannot aid him in securing them because they do not accord with God's will, he surrenders them. Most possibly, the humble person will increasingly ask only for the presence of God himself. Just as with a cherished earthly friend, he will delight more and more to share the attitude, the appreciations, the tasks, and the friendships of God. He will discover that the work of God embraces great moral tasks, that his friendships include all people, that his appreciations transcend the material life, that his interests center in the development of persons with character of moral beauty and strength, and that his attitudes find their central motives in love. He will be able to go from his prayer to a reading of the Gospels or the letters of St. Paul with a quickened perception of the reality of God's gracious Spirit in the mind of man. He will recognize anew how different the Spirit is from that which motivates greedy and cantankerous persons. In the second place, the kind of conversation here described implies that one thinks of God as a person, and in this, the modern mind faces one of its most formidable difficulties. Over a brief period of history, our scientific discoveries have made us so keenly aware of the complex network of physical and psychical laws that we tend to think in terms of law and of processes. So immediate is this vast array of new knowledge concerning natural law that our thought forms and our language can hardly get beyond abstractions. Law and dependable processes are impersonal. So to keep our intellectual respectability, we define God to ourselves as a system of moral laws and spiritual processes. And since it is most difficult to pray to them, we soon begin to substitute for prayer right thinking. That this is only a halfway station is clear when we remember that laws have an origin and processes are activities of forces yet beyond them. To stop with what we can immediately observe, or imagine with no definite thought of the active, intelligent will that uses these laws and processes to work out his purposes and plans, betrays the intellects to which we have attempted such fidelity. Think, for example, of the very personal way in which Jesus referred to my Father. Similarly, the language of the devout from Jesus until now has expressed thoughts of God in personal terms. Nothing short of personality can satisfy genuine intellectual inquiry into the character of the power upon which our good depends. This thought, however, suggests that we will not expect God to speak to him through occult agencies. With his growing sensitivity to God's spiritual character, he will not mistrust the guidance given him through his own intelligence. While he does not hope to comprehend the entire range of God's thought, he comes increasingly to feel that God is within him, in his mind, his will, his attitudes, and his ideals. The initial upsurging within a moral vigor, which enables him to turn himself toward God, he now recognizes as the work of the divine Spirit, who stands ever ready to assist even the smallest effort of the human spirit to realize its true character. The reason many fail to find God is that they do not seek him where he is at work. Finally, whoever prays effectively must surrender himself without hesitancy or reserve to God. His attitude is one of glad response rather than doubt and uncertainty. This is the active exercise of faith. Nothing could be more misleading or could work more harm than the notion that faith is an effort to accept as true something that appears contrary to knowledge. Rather, faith is the spirited affirmation of truth that he apprehends, an affirmation to which the next step and ventures to take it. Faith, said Clement of Alexandria, is the beginning of action. It is the outreaching of inner conviction. It is dynamic and propulsive. If men acted only and always on verified knowledge, if results were always guaranteed beforehand, man in no area of life would create anything. Faith assumes that which is already known, perceives what follows, and acts to reduce experience that which ought to be. The naive definition of a Sunday school boy, that faith is believing what you know isn't so, represents a far too widely held attitude towards this great word from the Gospels. Faith to Jesus meant a simple but hearty trust in God the Father, which to him resembled more than anything else the glad confidence of a child in its parents. A somewhat more rugged but equally realistic view of which was supplied during the war by the now famous Donald Hankey. Faith is betting your life that there is God, he said. His phrasing of the concept has a modern ring to it. But as Mr. John A. Hutton reminds us, St. Paul expressed in an even more striking fashion the same idea. In his letter to the Philippians, he characterized his comrade, Epaphroditus, as one, quote, who for the work of Christ came nigh to death, hazarding his life, unquote. Rufus Jones insists that this phrase, hazarding his life, actually means laying down his life as a stake. That is, betting his life on a venture for the cause of Christ. It is easy to see in what way faith becomes an active force in all practical life. A boy and a girl meet and find themselves so irresistibly drawn together that they heartily pledge their loyalty to each other. As long as ye both shall live. They seldom call this faith until it has been betrayed. But it is that, nevertheless. This joyous trust of the lover is not only necessary to the building of a home, it is a natural response of love. The confident belief of one friend in another causes him to take great risks for his friend. In each case, there is the unhesitating surrender of a personal freedom to participation in a larger community of interests and loyalties, a hearty response to the needs of those to whom devotion is given. In a more impersonal but nonetheless real sense, all business and financial cooperation depend upon a confident trust in others. So too, one who enters into intimate communication with God, expecting a manifest expression of God's disposition towards him, will yield himself in loving trust to God, a trust so hearty that it immediately issues in a definite response. This response may be in the form of action, the acceptance of a challenge to join battle with sin, conscious of reinforcement from the inexhaustible moral energy of God. It may be simply the appropriation of God's love to himself to effect a needed release for some tension or uncertainty. Or it may be ready acceptance of some new insight, with its corresponding impulses to further devotion and the assumption of greater responsibilities. One further act must be reviewed, however, if our conception of faith is to be adequate. The hazarding of life for the sake of some desirable end is not a blind guess. It is not a leap in the dark. In addition to its willingness to venture into untried paths, it consists in an interpretation of the inner quality of people and situations. Faith thus ventures beyond tried fact, not because it is altogether reckless and does not see danger, but because it understands the nature of danger and knows the way through. To be sure, many leaps of faith have been made into the dark, but primarily because they assumed something to be true, which was not in fact true. This means only that our insights come through our own intellectual and emotional capacities and must therefore suffer from the use of defective equipment. But this truth is unassailable. Great faith has the capacity to see and to interpret values, truth, and duty in a manner that impels people to adventurous modes of living, not justified by purely rational processes. This capacity grows with use. Whoever obeys the heavenly vision puts himself in the way of still greater and more accurate vision. Men of science, such as Newton, Einstein, Millikan, have through the eager use of their capacities prepared themselves to see the next step in their special field. Men of music, such as Mozart and Beethoven, have cultivated their special powers to the enrichment of music lovers of all time. And painters, such as Raphael and Michelangelo, have so refined a gift potential in many that they see in human faces the unique quality that makes a great picture. The rest of us miss seeing what these rare persons see because we are not given the necessary attention and interest to the cultivation of the special gifts concerned. Now, if the expectant vision combined with the practical adventure leads to notable creative enterprises in other fields, should we not expect the more of religion? Is it an unbelievable assertion that to those with loving obedience turn their eyes upon God and hold them there, he will respond not only with unmistakable assurance of his own reality and presence, but also with the revelation of his will for them? Chapter 9. The Master. We seek a master, time schedules, descriptions of scenery along the way, suggestions for the wisest use of time, plans of projects in which we may invest our highest energies, interpretations of the goals we seek. All these offer us valuable guidance. But what we wait for is an overmastering loyalty. We want to give life away, but we will not give it to a rational explanation of facts, no matter how lucid, nor to a description of what may or ought to be, no matter how attractive the picture created. Let the leader emerge, however, who is able to embody in his own life our dreams. Let him summon us to his banner, and we cannot withhold our allegiance. Let us turn our interest upon one who is himself, quote, the way, the truth, and the life, unquote. No leader ever made more audacious claims or demanded more undivided loyalty than Jesus. Quote, I am the door. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the good shepherd. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. Unquote. Sheer presumption, or else the proclamation of eternal truth. Consider further, of those who would be his disciples, he suggests that they count the cost, just as they would if they were about to build a house. And the cost is terrific. Quote, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Unquote. Jesus is not merely saying, do not let the affairs of this world come before me. He is deliberately singling out the most significant relationships known to his audience. In effect, he is saying, quote, consider well the cost. The tenderest and most binding ties of earthly life must be made second to me. If you cannot accept this truth, then do not assume to be my disciple, for you are not worthy of me. Unquote. One can hardly imagine a more exacting loyalty. Yet the degree to which men of all ages have sincerely recognized this demand is stranger than the rigor of the demand itself. Over and over again, men have asked, quote, "To whom shall we turn? Thou hast the words of eternal life." Unquote. It is said of George Herbert that when even in ordinary conversation he used the word Jesus, he added in reverent undertone, "My master." The reason we continue to find in him the master of life, however, lies not in his verbal commands to unfaltering fidelity. Many others have asked vainly for the same loyalty. Something in his manner of life, his spiritual outlook, his unswerving moral convictions, elicits our spontaneous devotion. We feel that indeed he has tapped the fountains of life, that he has made available to us the moral energies of the universe. In him we see the only picture both of man and of God that satisfies the unspoiled religious consciousness. Quote, "Be ye perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." Unquote. He asks, and we go off in pursuit of the impossible. By any ordinary standard we shall counsel, quote, "Be realistic, accept the facts, and set for yourself an obtainable goal." Unquote. But having once seen the vision revealed in his life, nothing else will do. The haunting urge to follow the gleam will realize itself in action. Somehow he is the stage manager who is able to bring out the potential drama that our warring impulses hold among themselves. Quote, "If any man is in Christ, he is a new creature." Unquote. That we may see in what way he leads us upon the personal quest we have been discussing in these pages, let us first regard him as an interpreter. Think, for example, how he interprets the essential worth of human life. One would suppose that he, like us, was often tempted to say that man is vile. Surely no one ever saw more misery caused by human selfishness, greater demonstrations of cruel, relentless hate, more fleshly immortality, more expressions of human caprice and unreliability. Yet he persisted in his faith that human personality is uniquely precious. For this proposition, he did not argue. Had he submitted extended rational proof in the manner of a college debater to show wherein persons, despite their apparent frailty, do possess noble qualities enough to be given a high rating in the scale of things, we could easily submit sufficient proof clearly to refute his argument. But when he ventures his life upon that central affirmation, there is no answer. In fact, Jesus himself sought no explicit vindication of his faith, and no one may well doubt that even his disciples supplied it. There is nowhere in literature with which I am familiar a more poignant scene than that depicted by the writers of the Gospels, in the story of Jesus facing alone the fateful issue of his mission in the Garden of Gethsemane, while his disciples slept in callous unawareness of what was really happening. It would be easy for any of us to recognize the worth of persons' outstanding virtue, but the unusual thing about the Master was that he saw this worth in the most unlikely people. He thought of these possibilities rather than their established achievements, and he acted as though these possibilities were more truly characteristic of them than their observed actions. Even though prodigals wasted their substance in far countries, women became morally impure like the women of Samaria, or good people became encrusted in deadening tradition like Nicodemus, he did not dismiss them as hopeless. He saw what they might become, and it was on that insight that he acted. This does not mean that he winked at sin or thought lightly of the evil in human nature. No one as subject to the whims of human passion and the elemental cruelty in people as Jesus was could ignore their significance. He had scathing words for hypocrites and exploiters. He could even caution, "Beware of men," but to people of the humble heart who received him, he gave power to become. That his appraisal of men was based upon a thoroughgoing realism must be evident to anyone who ponders the meaning of his prayer on behalf of his murderers. Quote, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Unquote. No sentimentalist could have achieved that crowning triumph. More than anything, he said about persons, however, more even than any specific instance of his regard for, quote, "the least of these my brethren," unquote. His own superb character as a man is the most irrefutable testimony to the high possibilities in human personality. Conscious as he was of his divine mission and heavenly guidance, he could still, as a man, pray while he hung upon the cross. Quote, "Father, forgive them." Unquote. Nowhere else in human history has the spirit of man risen so high. His great victory was not that he subdued his enemies,
nor that he trusted the destroying vengeance of a god, but that he could sincerely pray for their pardon, that he loved them even unto death. Unlike the majority of us, the greatest vengeance he could think of was love as a requital for hate, and forgiveness as a reward for the cruelest possible attacks upon his person. Richard Roberts has written with penetrating understanding, quote, "When the last dreadnought has been scraped and sold for iron, when power is no more than a faded and shabby memory, when the last plutocrat is dead and forgotten, and grass is growing in the streets of now proud cities, the chiefest glory of this race of man will be that there once lived on this earth a peasant named Jesus, who was born in a cave and died on a cross." Unquote. As an interpreter of the worth of personality, the master himself becomes our greatest incentive to pursue the quest into the powers and purposes native to each of us, a quest that we attempted in the first few pages of this book. The conviction emerges that he, quote, "hath gotten us the victory," unquote. That even as Michelangelo could take a discarded, half-worked piece of marble and form out of it the famous statue of the boy David, so the master can take our half-formed, confused personalities and make of them whole persons who exhibit high and gracious spiritual capacities. Think again of Jesus as an interpreter of God. Surely the master did not arrive at his estimate of man simply by observing the conduct and attitudes even of the noblest souls of his time. Such a stalwart and dependable faith as his was born not of earth but of heaven. Men were precious because they were the children of God, the Divine Father. Wayward they might be, as unlike God in character as the Prince of Darkness himself, yet these very persons were heirs of the finest qualities of life produced anywhere in creation. Men could claim this heritage for themselves, could enter into joyous filial relationship with God by becoming like him morally. If Jesus revealed the innermost nature of man by exhibiting it at its highest, he likewise revealed the nature of God by portraying it in his own person. His serenity when storm clouds burst above his head, his revulsion at greed and hypocrisy, and his steadfast interest in the cause of the outlawed social classes was all dependent upon his understandings and appreciation of the larger cosmic relationships of which he was a part of. He could move through life with poise and confidence because everywhere and always he was at home. He had the sense of belonging which we saw for ourselves in an earlier chapter. Life for him depended not upon a tenuous earthly existence, but upon sharing the essential moral character of the universe. Quote, "Be not afraid of them that kill the body, and after that have no more they can do," unquote, he warned. One should regard rather the power that was able to dispose of one's spirit. Clearly and explicitly, he stated the reason for his demand that his disciples, quote, "love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and persecute you," unquote. It was simply, quote, "that ye may be the children of your Father, which is in heaven, for he maketh the sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and the unjust," unquote. You are not like your Father, to do no more than love those who love you, and do good to those who do good to you. Even the publicans do that. And one might add that even modern gangsters have a gratitude towards each other for assistance rendered. But why be like the Father? Because he is the source of all creation. From him spring both the beauty of the lily and the excellence of human personality. To be like him is to be at home, to achieve the highest purpose of existence. Like him, man is in essence spirit, and more truly shares the fountains of abundant living when he acts under the propulsion of values that issue from moral and spiritual awareness. Quote, "God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth," unquote. To feel and to act upon this plane is to be more genuinely man. Now, let us go on to inquire into the quality of God's disposition as embodied in the active life of the Master. For one thing, he is a suffering God, and his suffering results from the gracious love he holds for his children. In giving them moral freedom, the power of choice, he made moral responsibility possible and furnished the situation in which character could develop, the crowning purpose of his creation. But in doing so, he created the risk of sin, which from the nature of the case must at some point clash with his immutable laws of justice.
They who sin will suffer the consequences. But because of the organic nature of society, the innocent also suffer from the misdeeds of others. Not only do people suffer, but God suffers because he is inextricably related to his own creatures. The prophet Isaiah pictured him as a suffering servant, seeking the redemption of his people. Hosea saw him standing in the relation of a husband to an unfaithful wife, whom he loved so dearly that, though she caused him immense pain, he could not put her from him. The only course open to such love is patient, sacrificial effort at restoration. In Jesus, we have not a description of this conception, but a demonstration of that love, a love that will not let man go. One great modern saint has found a parallel in the circulation of blood through the human body. Even as it moves unobserved to all parts of the body, healing wounds and restoring broken and diseased tissue, so the love of God moves through creation, seeking the cure of lives broken and diseased by sin. Such healing naturally requires that his love must absorb into itself the anguish of broken and beaten souls. Jesus going to the cross is the embodiment of this gracious God seeking to absorb himself in the consequence of continued sin, and so to restore his children to life. What a price to pay! But he winced not at the worst that a blind and crazed people could do to him. If God is like Christ on his cross, then our Father gives his own lifeblood continually to draw from us the poison of our evil passions and the heat of our moral insanity, and to feed into our life stream his own gracious spirit. Dr. Herbert Gray made this truth poignantly convincing in an instance from his experience. Quote, "I once watched a really loving mother and a profligate son," unquote. He said, "I learned more about the price of sin's atonement in those days than I ever learned from books of theology. For I saw that by her love she was forever bound to that boy, and that by her goodness she was doomed to feel his sins like blows upon her heart, and to make his shame her shame. Moral indifference would have delivered her from her agony, but she could not be morally indifferent. The denial of her love would have allowed her to escape, but she could not deny her love. Was he not her boy? Was she not involved with him body and soul? And so she found her cross, and so too there came a day when I felt that nothing in this world held hope for that boy except the love which his sin could not kill. I felt his sin had found its match. I seemed to catch a glimpse of a day when sin would have to let go and love would remain the victor." Unquote. The God Jesus revealed is, moreover, a seeking God. He does not wait for men to come to him, but his love reaches out into discordant clash of human society and seeks the restoration of a divine family in which men realize themselves as brothers and God as their father. As a woman seeks a lost coin, as a shepherd persists in his search for a wandering sheep, so our Father extends himself toward us with undiscourageable patience. His face is set against all evil, and he will not rest content until every destructive agency has been transformed by the alchemy of love into a glorious harmony. But in his campaign against sin, he does not forget the sinner. He will overcome not through the triumphant march of a vengeful army. Rather, he will subdue sin by the recovery of filial trust and obedience. This return he seeks not by threats, but by entreaty of love on a cross. Once more, change the classification and think of the Master as our example. To readers of these pages, I do not need to argue that he was an example in moral purity and unselfish service, but consider two other areas in which his examples need careful study in our time. The tranquil poise with which he could encounter the most upsetting crisis of his life did not just happen. It was rooted in his sincere faith in the guiding presence of the Father. He was often weary with long hours of patient ministry to those in need. He was often anxious over those that would not receive his message. He wept bitterly because Jerusalem refused to be saved. But in no instance do we feel that he has lost his poise or surrendered to panic. And this quiet confidence was the expression neither of overdeveloped ego, which could not accept defeat, nor of a stoic control of feeling, which did not reveal what went on beneath the surface. As we read the Gospels, we cannot escape the conviction that Jesus faced life with open eyes and clear understanding of what was happening to him. That manner of appraising life and dealing with it
as a needed condition for the best use of our power. And in a time like that in which we live, with chaos a constant threat, when people of apparent intelligence are daily overcome with some kind of social hysteria, the type of constancy exhibited in Jesus is an even greater prize. Jesus could act in this manner because he was sure God was in the world, that he was working in it, and that he could convert even the evil purposes of men to his own praise. The Master nowhere felt any need to argue for the existence of God, for his goodness, or for his love towards man. These things he took for granted, and acted upon them as serenely as a small child trusts their sufficiency of his parents. His message was not his, but his Father's. The work he was doing was not of his own planning. He had been sent to do it by his Father. There may be considerable uncertainty as to when Jesus became fully conscious of his redeeming mission. There may be more uncertainty as to how fully the disciples shared his consciousness of that momentous purpose. But upon his constant sensitivity to the directing hand of his Father, there can be no doubt. Let no one dismiss the subject with the glib statement that this was because Jesus was different from ordinary people. There is so much about Jesus that lies beyond our grasp to analyze. But in this manner, there is ample material to show us at least one source of his trustworthy personal assurance. His devotional life, during the brief period of his public ministry, is an open book, and it records many occasions of communion and fellowship with his Father. Jesus knew God because he kept in constant contact with him. He gave his whole heart in devout response to him. But the quality of the Master's faith at the very beginning of his ministry seems to say that his consciousness of God as Father was not a sudden revelation to him, but that it was the natural outgrowth of a whole life devoted to the cultivation of his relationship to God. Most of us could rest more securely upon the faith that we are not alone if we took the time to seek a presence. Another respect in which the Master comes to us with a commanding example is his disposition to act rather than to talk. To be sure, he did talk. He gave the Beatitudes. He gave a terse summation of the law and the prophets. He said, quote, "Love your enemies, do good to them that hate you," unquote. And these words have gathered increasing significance as man pondered the way he lived. But if the words of Jesus were the only things left behind, he probably would have been known only as an obscure teacher. What gave his few recorded words their great meaning was the startling fact that he actually lived the way he talked. He did not give hate for hate and love for love. He did not seek to have his enemies restrained by lawful means. He loved his worst enemies, even as he suffered their sword thrusts in his side and their driven nails into his hands and feet. How Christians, those who call themselves Christian, can sing, "O love that will not let me go," and then perhaps even before they leave the church, indulge in the slander of fellow Christians, is one of the paradoxes of contemporary life. St. Paul said, quote, "Love is never selfish. Love is never glad when others go wrong. Love is gladdened by goodness, always slow to expose, always eager to believe the best," unquote. Thousands listen to these words, sing of the love of God, and eat the Lord's Supper in memory of the greatest instance of unselfish love mankind has ever known. Then they return to their homes and rejoice in uncomplimentary gossip, and to their selfish business, and grasp every opportunity of selfish gain. This is not a matter of isolated concern. Rare indeed is the person who acts sincerely upon the assumption that love is the law of life. Many manage to engender bitterness, mistrust, and even acts of reprisal and spite over differences in Christian faith. That, too, is a tragic paradox of contemporary life. If anyone is seriously inquiring for the way to religious knowledge, let him take the path of the Master. Let him act as though it were really true that the Christian is unselfish in thought and deed, and to him will be revealed the mysteries of the kingdom. By his life, and preeminently his death, Jesus released in the world a spiritual energy that assists us to take even our initial steps toward God. He did something for us by his death on Calvary that we could not do for ourselves. Describe it any way you may, argue about it in any fashion you choose, yet the fact remains that Calvary did something tremendous in history. Since then, persons have found available a regenerating power never before experienced. Let no one regard this power as esoteric or occult. It is real, and its working is no more unusual than any other sources of energy
with which we are more familiar. A workman can deliver a blow of 100 pounds with a sledgehammer, but by pressing a button lightly with one finger, he can release electric power sufficient to deliver a trip hammer blow of 10 tons. With the natural voice, one can be heard only a short distance, but over the radio, one can in a flash of seconds be heard around the world. On foot, one can travel only 3 to 4 miles an hour, but in an airplane he can encircle the globe in 8 days. These startling achievements are possible only because man has discovered the tremendous physical energies of the universe, and he has so disciplined himself that he can synchronize his own activities with them. So too, Jesus discovered and harnessed for us the incomparable, more valuable, and more powerful moral law of love. It will work greater marvels in human relationships than electricity will in physical relationships. But to experience its power, we must take up the cross and follow the Master. Chapter 10. Worship. In a deep fog or on a dark night, one needs light. When one is exhausted, he needs rest and renewal of strength. When one is perplexed and uncertain, he needs guidance. When a community is torn by strife, it needs a central loyalty strong enough to dissolve all conflicting attractions. Both the individual and the community are in constant need of influences that spur the initiative and lead the achievement. In the religious experience of worship, one not only sees life whole, but he sees it centered about a single point of reference that gives meaning to all its related parts. As the spokes in a wheel point in all directions from the central hub, so the multiform interests of a single life reach out into numerous channels. But like the spokes of the wheel, they get their direction, their strength, their importance from their secure connection with the hub. For the Christian, the center is God, the God we have discovered in Christ. Very few people, with the exception, of course, of psychologically abnormal persons who suffer from, quote, split personalities, unquote, and other forms of psychic division, live without some form of worship. But the object of worship varies. Some worship money. That is the hub around which everything else centers. Some worship sex. That for them is the key to everything. Others worship power, personal vanity. Indeed, the world is full of gods, before whom thousands do homage. Some even who assemble in Christian churches no more worship God than do Shintoists. They, like natives in a mission land, would simply place him among their other idols. They do not really surrender their loyalty to him. He is not the central figure that provides meaning for all the lesser aspects of life. Some other value interprets life for them, and even their conceptions of the real God they profess to love are colored by it. This unconscious paganism would shock many guilty of it, but no honest effort to study so meaningful an experience can escape the truth that the real object of one's worship is that which gives life meaning for him. In this book we have been searching for the true God, and we believe that in the Father, who was to Jesus the very origin of all that is true, good, and beautiful, we have discovered the only object worthy of complete devotion. We have talked of the importance of having a vivid and immediate fellowship with him. We have tried to understand different aspects of this process, such as prayer, faith, and moral effort. We have recalled the manner of Jesus' devotional life. Let us now draw these together in our consideration of the complete act of worship. Ample reason for doing this will be made clear by a brief summary of its values. For one thing, it keeps the windows of the soul open to the light we need no matter what may be our situation in life. We are all exiles. We live in a transitory temporal order. But from the depths of us there arise aspirations that speak hauntingly of a nativity not of this earth. Our life story is graphically depicted in the classical drama of Daniel, the prophet. He was descended from David, the great king of Israel, but he was carried away into Babylonian captivity in early youth. He was taught the wisdom of the Chaldeans, but he refused to eat the unclean meat offered from the king's table. There remained in him the seed of his Judean heritage, but he became an honored official in the land of his captivity. The secret of his unusual life is expressed in a single verse from the book that bears his name. Quote, "Now his windows were open in his chamber towards Jerusalem." Unquote. The holy city symbolized for him the essential character of life to which he was native. Through windows open to his great religious heritage, he kept burning the true light within. From that light he received power not only to remain faithful to his God in an inhospitable environment, but wisdom and strength to serve well this alien people among whom circumstances had placed him. Where could there be found a more real and dramatic portrayal of the situation in which man finds himself? The life of the material world, though it is our temporary home, does not provide sacred oil that feeds the inner candle. But it has windows through which our yearning spirits may reach out to the source of light and power. Like Daniel, to be true to our native heritage of the Spirit, we cannot become wholly acclimated to the temporal order. To remain alive within, however, we need, like him, to be reflectors that gather up the gleam and transmute it into the highest possible life of practical affairs. To hide that light under a bushel, because we remain subject to the limitations of the world of sense, is to call upon our heads the condemnation given the man in Jesus' parable who buried his one talent. But the world of practical affairs will become hopelessly muddled. We shall turn to the worship of half-gods. We shall indeed misplace our highest capacities of loyalty, if we do not keep our perspectives true, the perspective of the central hub. One who lives and works in metropolitan New York City, hemmed in by the towering buildings that surrounded him, needs on occasion to climb to the highest point of the Palisades and look over the buildings to see the skyline, or else he will imperceptibly come to interpret New York as the part that affects him. Not to keep the wider perspective subjects us to the killing danger of being so enmeshed in the immediate that we shut out completely a larger world of rich value. The difference is that of living in a room lined with mirrors, which return one's own reflection, or in a room lined with windows which open upon wide horizons. When I purchase a suit of clothes, this difference becomes embarrassingly real to me, for it is only on these occasions, when the salesman directs me to a cubicle whose walls in all directions give back my own reflection, that actually I experience the physical counterpart of the spiritual egoism, which is a constant threat. Genuine worship takes us to the upper room and lures us out of ourselves into the world where God lives. A second aspect of Christian worship, which is closely related to the first, is the manner in which it increases moral sensitivity. No experience of communion with God can fail to make us hungry for the moral qualities exhibited in our master pattern. To be in close contact with neat and well-dressed persons is a spur to neatness in itself. To associate with others of culture and learning stimulates at least an interest in education. To live close to generous and unselfish people is at least an encouragement to more selfless living on our part. But to come face to face with the goodness of God, to sense in personal contact with Him His boundless justice and mercy, cannot make us increasingly aware of the part moral values play in Christian experience. They emerge as the filial tie between God and the persons and the social tie between persons. What I speak of here is not a sentimental desire simply to be a lovely person. Even sentiments get themselves molded into a moral pattern, and such a sentiment as this often comes out merely as a technique of personal vanity. Many people find it possible to rejoice in God and to hate a person at the same time. That such rejoicing is spurious becomes plain when we recall the rugged language of the New Testament. Quote, "He that loveth not his brother, whom he hath seen, cannot love God, whom hath he not seen." Unquote. Jesus' insistence on the moral character of worship is expressed in no halting fashion. Quote, "Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift." Unquote. This did not mean that God had set a formal requirement, but that in being morally separated from others, of his children, man is inherently separated from God. To share life with God, and on the other hand, means that, like Jesus, one will become increasingly aware of the injustice and tragic suffering in the world. And if he realizes this very deeply, he will identify himself with the cross and will seek to share in the work of atonement. Genuine and profound community with God thus leads one into deep water. Let no one who is afraid to take the risks of high adventure attempt it. A third effect of worship is a tremendous release of energy within us. Even the commonplace demands of life drain our powers. The unusual challenges call upon reserve strength which we did not suspect that we had. Life has its ways of using up vitality. This is true not only in the sphere of the physical, but also in the sphere of the spiritual. Many people fail in high moral living, not because they do not know the right way, but because they lack the necessary power. Continued moral weariness leads to anemic character. It is no wonder that character often buckles hopelessly the moment it is put under pressure. It too frequently is not replenished at the springs of spiritual strength. If one follows Jesus on his morning vigils in quiet places by the sea, in desert places, on the hillside, if one follows him to the synagogue at the hour of prayer, or to the fireside worship of friends in quiet little Bethany, one comes upon the conviction that the Master could perform his human service of love only because he constantly drank from the fountains that never run dry. Worship in this Christian sense, whether it be private or public, gives enduring support to every noble impulse, purifies motives, and brings primary values into first place in the affections. This combination of spiritual factors generates not only fervency of spirit, but robust habits of moral living. One of the elements of Christian worship that strongly supports our ideals, even in times of frustration, is the manner in which it cultivates the feelings of kinship with the long line of prophets, apostles, saints, and heroes of the past. Especially is this true of group fellowship. One begins to grasp the encouraging assurance that, although much in his experience is novel, still neither he nor his generation is entirely alone on an unconquered frontier. A cloud of witnesses surrounds us, and their testimony is heartening. The great spirits of the past form a line of continuing faith and achievement into which we enter with just pride. We look upon them not with the veneration of the antiquarian, but with the respect of the novice for those who have excelled. Our interest is not to perpetuate their names in marble and on canvas, but to continue and to provide new forms of expression for their strong faith and quality of life. Hence our social tendencies and our own religious experience converge to effect an enriching exchange. Through our own spiritual achievement, we are able to understand and appreciate more fully the deep struggles and convictions of a Paul, an Augustine, or John Wesley. Sharing with these their testimony sharpens our original spiritual perception and enables us to add new vitality to the continuing fellowship. This source of renewing revelation is denied to us, however, if we persist in a static attitude of veneration. Genuine reverence for the past is a spur to creative action, but nothing is more paralyzing than a dead past. What was alive in Paul and Francis or in Luther did not die. The antiquarian, forgetting this fact, will search out their bones and there set up shrines. But he who shares the great loyalties and faith of these men, forgetting all about their dead bodies, will experience afresh their life with God. Once more, genuine fellowship with God and with other Christians lights up life with a joyous expectancy and a sense of destiny. While it makes no parade or gives itself no airs, the life, hid with Christ in God, becomes conscious of connections that render it vastly more important than natural human living. With origins in a distant past, and convinced that it doth not yet appear what we shall be, the devout Christian consciousness cultivates an absorbing sense of urgency and a resilience of spirit that enables one, even on the grayest of gray days, to look for more beyond. There is in all vital persons enough optimism to expect an upturn of fortune, but the expectancy of the Christian worshipper does not center in hope of personal gain or preferment. Rather, he shares a degree of the attitude of Jesus, that he had been chosen as an instrument through which divine life is fulfilling itself. Failure to share in the sense of worthfulness opens the door to frustration, inanity, and the conviction of futility. Unless I have misread the symbols, too many of the generation to which I belong have no reverence for life, primarily because they do not see that it has any mission beyond itself. They have demonstrated that when men try to live by bread alone, they die. Cynicism springs out of the carcass of idealism, and, if allowed to grow to its extreme maturity, leads to moral recklessness. A student from one of our best and most respected girls' colleges in justifying freedom of sex asked a friend recently, quote, "Why shouldn't we young people turn loose and get the best out of life while we can? Everyone admits that another world war is not far off. In our college classes, we are taught that the whole economic and social order is tottering. We don't know whether this is true or not, but we do live under the fear of an end to things like homes and useful work. Why should we save ourselves from these things when there is little hope that we shall ever have them?" Unquote. This was no flippant or supercilious dismissal of the value of morality. The girl was a serious-minded student, and her lament was born out of fundamental despair and insecurity characteristic of wide areas of contemporary life. If she and her fellow students are to be condemned, so are her parents and her teachers. Her attitude, nevertheless, illustrates what happens when we lose the conviction of destiny and purpose that comes out of a dynamic Christian faith. Worship keeps aglow the buoyant love for life, because through it the worshiper sees beyond immediate disturbances. No matter how serious they are, finds himself connected with an unending source of moral and spiritual strength, and consciously yields himself as the instrument. Although he knows his unworthiness of a continued way of life, which at once expressed through immediate and tangible experience, but which forever transcends it. These observations on the value of Christian worship make inevitable another summary of conditions that must be fulfilled before anyone can hope to approach so rich an experience. Assuming unselfish motives, a genuine readiness to do the will of God, and a disposition to wade into deep waters, there still remains a minimum of immediate requirements. One must take the initiative and prepare himself for vital commerce with God. Mechanical or automatic actions will not do. Conversation with a friend is an exchange of living reactions. Friends give themselves to each other in wholehearted response. A friend of mine related that while visiting a cathedral in Italy, he witnessed the christening of a baby. The mother presented the baby to the priest at the altar, and while he went through the ritual, the mother turned with the baby and exhibited it to the visitors with motherly pride, apparently oblivious to the prayers of the priest. The whole procedure was mechanical. It was as if she were in an automat. She had placed the nickel in the slot and was waiting for her pie to come. Another visitor to an Eastern Orthodox church was given a seat in the screened-off chancel. Here even the priest appeared to regard the worship as wholly objective. He would intone a line before the altar, and then while the choir sang the responsorial, he would leave the altar and explain to the guests the significance of what was happening, much as if he were an engineer who had just manipulated some gadget and was explaining the resultant mechanical action. As far removed as these instances at first appear, they are essentially no different from what we do if we expect the mere repetition of words, whether in prayer, reading of scripture, or in singing of hymns, to effect in us spiritual change. Whoever really enters the sanctuary where God is must surrender himself in glad and loving response to the images of him, created in historical narrative, lyric poetry, or in the outreaching petitions of prayer. This is, in short, our invitation to him to speak his messages to us. And when he comes to us personally, his revelation of himself brings us into a direct relation. He takes the place of the pictures we have used as aids to his presence. Again, one will have to persist in his attitude of loving devotion, for God is not apprehended by a single act. The Christian's relation to God is not a formal tie, completed and thereafter remaining the same. It increases by a process of continued growth. As a plant, appearing first in a small, delicate embryo, grows into a strong, sturdy tree, so our religious experience, at first fragile, grows not only into strong character, but also in a lively awareness of God as the source of all things. This happens if we persist in the frame of mind that makes possible the continuous flow of divine life in us. One part of this spiritual constancy will consist in a progressive adjustment of moral life to accord with the new insight gained in worship. Further increase in vision will depend upon what we do with this already gained. And a second part will consist of the application of intelligence to the environment in which we live. Here, God is at work in nature and in the life of man. Through all the factors that make up our world, God is seeking to make himself known in beauty, justice, and truth. Wherever these are found, God is not far off. St. Paul insists that, quote, "He that abideth in love abideth in God," unquote. Many persons will find that devotional exercises are fruitless until they have turned in this direction and through an appraisal of moral activity found at least a minimum of spiritual insight with which to begin.
Chapter 11. Service. We rejoice in doing things, and we have a suspicion that unless whatever we are talking about soon leads to a plan of action, it is just so much thin air. All the way through our discussion, we have emphasized that action, thought, and appreciation are interwoven in any complete pattern. The path we have followed, moreover, has led inevitably to the outward expression of our inner experiences. Beginning with the question, quote, "What is the meaning of my own life?" unquote, we were led straight to a discussion of larger relationships, and we encountered a propulsive love at the heart of things. Studying that at close range in the life of the Master, we saw it moving persons to project themselves outward. "He that loseth his life for my sake shall find it," declared Jesus. And the people in the history of the world who stir our warmest admiration are those who in some form of self-giving have served well. The time in which we live, moreover, is full of challenges: underfed children, city slum areas, racial conflicts, closed factories, corruption in high offices, and all these problems seen through the eyes of religious indifference. We are not concerned to compare our age with others, but no one can be genuinely alive today without realizing the high moral demands that face us on all sides. The ancient call, quote, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?" unquote, still rings clear. It is implicit in the confusion of our life. It speaks from the heart of the Christian religion, the cross. It finds an echo in the original social tendencies of human nature. If we hesitate before the challenge, it may be that we do not sufficiently appreciate the truth that life is a trust placed in our hands. We have been given the custody of certain powers and talents. To develop them to their greatest height is the least that can be asked of us. This view has a human basis when we consider that our community, our family, indeed all those persons who participated in giving us life, in nourishing it until we could take hold for ourselves, and in providing us a social environment in which to realize selfhood, have really made an investment in us. We can give no smaller return than to regard our powers as a trust, and to seek to use them for the highest purposes. Robert Browning, after recalling what his father had done for him, how he had stood by him in all circumstances, summed the whole matter up, quote, "It would have been unpardonable not to have done my best," unquote. I saw recently in an automobile electric shop 2 worn spark plugs mounted in a bird cage. Over the cage a placard proclaimed, "These birds were caught stealing gas," because they prevented the maximum mileage in gasoline and robbed the car of its greatest power. They were adjudged thieves. Of how many persons could it be said, "These people were caught stealing their vital energies"? Suppose Jesus, Luther, Newton, or Edison had simply refused to employ the insight and capacities they had possessed. Our world would be immeasurably impoverished. This conviction, furthermore, has a divine support. Quote, "Ye are not your own, for ye are bought with the price." Unquote. Life is a trust from God, and we take too much authority to ourselves when we assume to dispose of our talents without consulting his wishes. Toscanini, the famous symphony conductor, regards his task as one of interpretation. A composition by Beethoven is a trust in his hands, and he attempts scrumptiously to express carefully the intent of the composer. Once during a rehearsal of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, he gave such a remarkable interpretation of the piece to the musicians that they cheered him wildly. When he finally had them quieted, he turned to them with tears in his eyes and pleaded, "Don't do this to me. You see, gentlemen, it isn't I, it's Beethoven." The truly religious person has something of that regard for his own life. Quote, "I live, yet it is not I, but Christ that liveth in me," unquote, is a conviction that runs counter to the popular cry of "my rights." The Christian senses that he has no absolute rights, that his only rights are those gained by the type of service he performed. If the urge to do some kind of significant service causes frustration in the experience of those whose occupations absorb their time and powers, let them remember that the Christian religion, in its normal expression, has never sought to extract people from their regular responsibilities. It has not made a cleavage between the sacred and the secular. That is a notion adopted from pagan religions. The Christian attitude is expressed in Jesus' parable of the judgment. To clothe, feed, and be a friend to, quote, one of the least of these my brethren, unquote, is distinctly a divine service. The opportunity to perform the greatest possible service lies in the normal relationships, where people face the tensions that come from unrestrained contacts. To be a Christian businessman, a Christian day laborer, or a Christian professional man, to be a Christian father, mother, son, or daughter, means that one follows the Master not only in valuing the unusual, but also the commonplace. Each of us has a set of obligations that have been accumulated even from before we were born. To do our duty in these and to see them sanctified and made into sacramental vessels is to look through the eyes of the man on the cross. Once when President Wilson was forced by official business to decline an invitation to attend a great celebration of Perry's victory on Lake Erie, he wrote, "I am kept away by the thought that no man can truly praise those who did their duty by neglecting his own." Unfortunately, many regard their jobs as being too insignificant to allow any opportunity for the expression of great ideals. Monotony and boredom have overcome them. To be sure, there are types of work that inevitably produce in the worker the sense of monotony. But if one expects to find work free of drudgery, he is doomed to disappointment. President Eliot, Harvard's notable executive, once affirmed that 9/10 of his work was sheer drudgery. Yet President Eliot made educational history. If in the midst of routine duties we pause to regard their larger significance, they will reveal many more opportunities of service than we realize. In one of our parks is a public water fountain. As one looks at it from bottom to top, his eyes pass from the massive slab stone surmounted by polished granite, inscribed in gilt letters, and topped by a beautifully sculpted marble angel, pointing heavenward. One naturally follows its direction and turns his glance skyward. Then he remembers that he came for a drink. He takes a common iron cup, fastened by an ordinary iron chain, and lets it fill with refreshing water that pours through a small lead pipe. The sculpture, the gilt, and the marble form the unusual in the scene. But the ordinary lead pipe, performing its monotonous duty, gives the fountain its real value. So too, the real sources of satisfying achievement spring from the continuous and commonplace responsibilities we bear. Ask a stonemason what he is doing. If he is blind, he will answer, "I am fitting stones together to make a living." If he sees the far-flung connections of his work, he will reply, "I am building a cathedral, and in it will reside an altar before which the souls of man will meet with God." Ask a mother and housewife, what is she doing? If she is blind, she will say, "I am constantly cleaning up after my family and cooking their meals." But if she is fully awake to her opportunities, she will answer, "I am making a home in which will actually be created the souls of persons who, too, will give character to the world." Ask a student what he is doing. If he is dull, he will say, "I am getting ready for an examination." But if he is beginning to see, he will reply, "I am trying to claim for myself a vast and rich heritage." Anyone who cares to take this larger view of his work will find it coming alive for him. Quote, "Every calling is great when greatly pursued," unquote, said Oliver Wendell Holmes. It was this disposition that made Epaminondas, a distinguished Greek military figure, say when his enemies elected him to be the common street cleaner, quote, "I will compel the office to reflect honor upon me by a faithful discharge of its duties," unquote. But a host will rise up and say, "In a time like the present, the question for many of us is not just the right kind of work, nor an opportunity to serve, but the opportunity to live." When King Edward VIII visited Glasgow recently, someone asked him how to reconcile a world in which the luxurious new ocean liner, the Queen Mary, and the slums of Glasgow can exist side by side. The king's terse reply was, "It's useless to go solving scientific problems unless we can solve that." There is a flair about the march of technical civilization. Indeed, it has become so glamorous that we have forgotten its original motive, the service of persons. It has, for many, ceased to be a means of better living, and it has become an end in itself. In short, greed has stolen the hearts of those with power. This presents an extra occupational challenge that no Christian, living in close contact with God, can let pass. To step aside is to read oneself out of the opportunity to be a worker with God in creation. As a Christian, he ought to recall the question put by the Master. What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? He has an opportunity to apply this question in two directions. First, he may
First, he may assure the victims of economic and political exploitation that what appears so tragic in the situation is not as bad for them as it first appears. He need not minimize the hazards to health, happiness, and security to which they are subject. But he can, by his manner of life and testimony, reveal that life consists not in the abundance of material possessions. There are too many great souls associated with poverty to affirm that moral and spiritual well-being depend upon material security. The two interact, but one does not cause the other. In the second place, the Christian can, insofar as he participates in economic and political power, act from Christian motives. He can, moreover, bring to bear the warnings of Jesus upon the victors who have garnered the spoils. Quote, "It were better for him, through whom offenses come, that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and be cast into the sea, than that he should offend one of these little ones." Unquote. One may be sure of the judgments of God upon injustice. However, the Christian's interest is not in the condemnation of the offender, but in his repentance. If the tremendous power of sacrificial love were directed towards conduct both in its individual and social senses, there is nothing that it could not do. If the professed Christians of the world really placed the cross at the center of their lives, war and wholesale exploitation simply would not happen. This type of service may introduce one to the initial stages of atoning love, such as that witnessed at Calvary. Let no one who is afraid of the deep waters try it. Chapter 12. Friendship. Lloyd Douglas has a character in Greenlight describe how he learned to drive an automobile. The man from the agency brought the car early one morning, and together they drove to the country. Within an hour, the new driver was starting, stopping, backing, and turning with ease. When he remarked that the difficulties of handling a car had surely been exaggerated, his mentor merely suggested that they return to the main highway and try traffic. Early morning city-bound traffic was heavy. The new driver began to perspire. Cars ahead, cars behind, cars passing at tremendous speed made him forget the instructions that a few minutes before had seemed so simple. At the first opportunity, he took a side road and stopped. Mopping his brow, he exclaimed, "If it were not for the other people—" "Yes," grinned the teacher, "that's about all there is to driving a car, the other people. There is more to living the Christian life than the other people, but they are essentially involved at every turn. Start in as much alone with God as possible. And if you stay with him, you will be in the thick of human traffic before the morning is done. Here is a glorious opportunity to give an expression to Christian faith that we are too frequently overlooking. We burden ourselves with great causes until our nerves are shattered and we become irritable and unapproachable. Without attempting to put friendship in place of other forms of service, let us regard it as an essential element of Christ-like self-giving. The gift without the giver is bare. The opportunity here becomes real when we consider the essential loneliness of every human life. A man boarded an express subway train in Grand Central Station, New York, and started for his home in Yonkers. Thousands milled around him and pressed in upon him as he stepped inside the train. In the car, humans were squeezed into every available inch of space. He did not even get a seat until he was only a station away from his destination. At the end of the subway line, he transferred to a trolley car, which also was packed. When he left the trolley, he walked a few blocks, meeting and passing an occasional pedestrian. At the door of his own home, he met his wife, and inside his son. Then he went upstairs to dress for dinner. As he faced himself in the mirror, he whispered wearily, "Alone at last." But suddenly, he had realized he had never been so much alone as when he was packed into the subway train. On crowded city streets, or in quiet suburban lanes, the souls of people face life alone. O. Henry, in one of his memorable short stories, pictures a Westerner in New York City who became so lonely that literally at the point of a gun he held up a restaurant cashier and demanded that he come across with some conversation. At birth, the whole world is excluded. In adolescence, the world intrudes but doesn't seem to understand. In mature life, it thrusts problems upon us and demands that we settle them within ourselves, in questions of duty, in choosing a life work, in selecting a mate. Indeed, numerous are the situations in which, like the ancient mariner, we seem alone, all alone on a wide, wide sea. Even old age with all the knowledge and wisdom of experience sometimes feels like one who treads alone, some banquet hall deserted, whose lights are fled, whose garlands are dead, all but he departed. To break through these barriers and give support when one faces duty, to offer understanding when one's purpose have by others been misread. Actually, to develop a sense of profound community with one's fellows is probably the most difficult, but incomparably the most important form of service. We probably fail here more often than at any other point, as evidence of which witness the hurt, the offenses, the misunderstandings that come even between those engaged in direct religious work. What a difference dependable friendship makes. How the confidence of our fellows hearten us, but how their sharp criticism shatters our composure. Woodrow Wilson, after the harassing days of the World War, said, quote, "It is as hard to stand up and do your duty when people are sneering at you as when they are shooting at you." Unquote. One morning after a sermon, Bishop Quayle was greeting people as they left the church when one remarked, "Well, Bishop, you surely fed us the husks today." Whereupon even that gentle soul retorted, "Yes, and I observed that the swine were here to eat them." This rejoinder fully illustrated what the sainted bishop affirmed on another occasion. Quote, "He is below himself who is not above an injury." Unquote. That in fact it is an excellent point from which to observe how we may overcome the distance between us and others, and so build this gracious bond of mutuality. We must be above easy offense. Love, said Paul, is never irritated, never resentful. Here is a crucial test of Christ-like character. The master could never be converted into an enemy by personal criticism. Can we? Quote, "It is a prince's part to pardon," unquote, reminded Lord Bacon. And Lincoln in more pointed language remarked, "No man resolved to make the most of himself can spare the time for personal contention. I shall do nothing through malice. What I deal with is too vast for malicious dealing." Precisely. Human relations involve issues of such consequence that it is beneath the life of a Christian to permit the dissipation of his spiritual worth in the poisons of resentment. Passing this test, however, is only preliminary to the more positive character of friendship. It is but the first mile. To be above offense reveals a capacity for something higher. To stop there is in effect to say, "I will do my share and no more." But the Master said, "Go the second mile also." Not because it is a legal requirement, but because love is eager, not only to believe the best, but also to experience the best. Jesus was far more concerned to be a friend than to have friends. "I call you servants no longer. I call you friends, because I have imparted you all that I have learned from my Father. You have not chosen me. It is I who have chosen you." Observe on what basis he placed friendship. Not upon what his followers had done to him or for him, but upon what he had shared with them. By contemporary standards, that is reversing the order. We count as friends those who have shared with us, but to follow the Master is to make friends by sharing with others. This disposition inevitably affects the attitude of others for us. But friendships with them does not consist primarily in their attitudes, but in ours. It is the exchange of this kind of self-giving that fosters mutual goodwill. And so our quest ends with the beginning. To discover our true worth, we had to go out of ourselves and into the heart of things. Now we face the truth that to work out that worth, we have to again go out of ourselves and into the outward bound social relationships. The religion of Jesus is the religion of new beginnings. Quote, "It does not yet appear what we shall be." Unquote. Thank you. The end.